In the previous video, we opened the forbidden pages of Enoch together, searching for answers about the origin of the female Nephilim beings, said to carry the bloodline of the Watchers. We believe they were nothing more than legends buried beneath the Great Flood, but the truth may be more terrifying than we imagined. Did they truly disappear, or have they only been hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return? Look again at what Shlomo Cohen reportedly captured along the coast of Israel. A female-shaped being with an almost unreal beauty, yet something deeply unnatural about her, vanishing into the depths of the sea the moment she was discovered. Some called it a mermaid, but researchers of the Nephilim bloodline gave it another name, the Watcher's Daughter, and not only in Israel. From mysterious reports in the Kandahar mountain range to leaked footage from restricted zones, living witnesses are beginning to break the silence. They are not describing gigantic monsters. They are describing beings with captivating beauty, yet carrying an ancient power. Today we will do more than read ancient texts. We will go looking for evidence. From some of the most controversial clips in internet history to the latest field reports from the year 2026. The truth is right in front of your eyes. Are you ready to face it? Who are the daughters of the Watchers? In the journey we took together in the previous episode, we opened the door to the origin of the fallen ones. Usually when we speak of hybrid beings from the world before the flood, our minds are fixed on the image of the male Nephilim violent giants who used brute strength to ravage the earth. But as I have shared with you before, the truth often lives in the gaps the crowd tends to overlook. There is one question that history and even those who teach theology seems to have quietly forgotten. Where did the female offspring of the fallen angels go? If the Watchers could father giant sons, then surely they also fathered daughters. To answer that, we cannot rely on speculation alone. We have to turn to a brief line with explosive force in the Book of Enoch in chapter 19. A passage that directly describes the fate of the women who joined themselves to the Watchers. And the wives of those erring angels shall become sirens. I know that at this very moment, the same doubt may be rising in your mind that rose in mine the first time I read that text. The Book of Enoch is not part of the official biblical canon, so does it really carry enough weight for us to trust it? This is exactly where I want us to look at something more legally grounded, the Epistle of Jude, an undeniable part of the New Testament. Jude, the very brother of Jesus, directly quoted Enoch to affirm the judgment awaiting the angels who abandoned their proper place. That proves that the earliest believers treated Enoch as a serious source, one that preserved the raw, vital details that Genesis had condensed for the sake of brevity. If in the previous video we only touched the surface, then here when we place these three pieces side by side, Genesis speaks of the hybrid unions. The Book of Enoch speaks of transformation into sirens, and Jude vouches for its seriousness. A terrifying picture begins to come into focus. It explains why ancient civilizations that never knew one another still describe the same supernatural female entity with such astonishing precision. We are talking about details repeated with a consistency so disturbing it is almost impossible to ignore the same half-human, half-water-being form, the same seductive power, and the same deadly effect on any man who dares come too close. The Greeks called them sirens. In West Africa, they were revered as Mami Wata. The Babylonians carved their forms into temple walls. The Slavs trembled before the Rusalki, while the Japanese wrote of the Ningyo more than 1,000 years ago. Have asked myself, and perhaps you have too, why would peoples separated by oceans and millennia paint such a specific portrait down to the finest details? On one hand, people may shrug and say it is all just coincidence. But on the other hand, and this is what kept my team and me awake through the night. What if they are all preserving the echo of a real event? An event so devastating to the created order that God himself had to intervene and wipe its traces from the earth. This is the context that gives the Great Flood a meaning far beyond the usual moral lesson. That is exactly what Genesis chapter 6 is trying to tell us through its first 4 haunting verses. The text draws a sharp distinction between the sons of God, B'nai Ha-Elohim, the angelic beings, and the daughters of men. And then verse 4 declares, there were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that. The phrase, and also after that, is the key I want you to pay very close attention to. It shows that this genetic corruption did not remain locked in the past. It has always sought a way to return to the earth by some path. Genesis gives us the heading, but it is the Book of Enoch that fills in the omitted details about the 200 watchers who descended upon Mount Hermon. From that unnatural union, a dreadful bloodline was born. Their sons devastated the earth. But the silence surrounding the female Nephilim is the very thread that ties the Bible to the mysterious legends found all over the world. When the Great Flood came, Noah was saved because his bloodline was perfect, meaning it had not been defiled by Nephilim DNA. The waters swept away everything on the surface of the earth. But stop and think with me for a moment. Water can destroy everything that walks on land. But water does not destroy what already lives in water. The flood never reached the deepest abysses of the sea. The Book of Enoch, chapter 7, also says that this corruption spread to birds, reptiles, and fish. And here is the turning point. While the male Nephilim used force to destroy the female Nephilim, inherited the power of seduction from their fathers. The male watchers were drawn to the beauty of human women. But now, their female descendants rise from the waters, using unreal beauty and enchanting voices to lure men into the depths. This is not coincidence. This is a brutal inherited mechanism of predation. I know all of this sounds insane in the modern world. We have been taught that these are only allegories, and yet, after what I am about to show you, that skepticism may have to give way to something else. What if physical traces of them are still hiding beneath the deepest parts of the sea? What if the terrifying encounters reported in the depths of the ocean are not imagination at all, but classified records that have never been released? Take a deep breath, because from this point forward, we are stepping out of the ancient texts and into the undeniable evidence I promised at the beginning of this video. Together we are going to search for the answer. Are those siren beings truly still present even now? Classified files on the Watcher's daughter's encounters, never before made public. My friends, I understand how you feel right now. At our age, after we have lived through enough rises and falls and seen far too many media stunts, it is hard for a blurry clip on the internet to truly concern us. And yet, set that skepticism aside for a moment. Because what happened on the shore of Kiryat Yam, Israel, in the summer of 2009, was not merely a passing social media craze. It became a case file weighty enough to draw the attention of some of the largest media organizations in the world and compel them to investigate. Look at this event through the eyes of an investigator. Hundreds of people in that coastal town, from hardened fishermen to tourists who had no connection to one another at all, firmly claimed they had seen a creature in the form of a young woman, yet with a long tail in place of legs. The first witness, a man named Cohen, described the moment as a shock to the core when he saw this entity sunbathing on a rock at sunset. The very hour that, according to ancient texts, the boundary between two worlds is at its thinnest. In the blink of an eye, the moment it recognized human presence, the creature merged into the waves with an inhuman speed. As for me, when I first looked at that shaky long-distance footage, I hesitated too, standing right at the 50-50 line. But this is exactly the point that pushes this story far beyond rumor. The respected American television network, NBC, did not stay on the sidelines. And the entire process of research and evidence gathering was ultimately compiled in the documentary series Destination Truth. This was not some amateur expedition team. These were seasoned professionals led by Josh Gates, a man known for approaching supernatural claims with a cool, skeptical mindset. The crew set up a sophisticated surveillance system along the Israeli coast for an entire week. They did not merely stand on shore with binoculars. They deployed long-range infrared cameras, thermal imaging equipment, and underwater audio devices known as hydrophones to detect any unusual sound frequencies. During those sleepless nights in the field, the technical team captured a moment that changed the entire situation. An entity roughly human in size, yet moving with a completely different physical structure, plunged into the dark waters of the Mediterranean Sea. That single moment forced even the coldest minds to reconsider. All of the raw data, including footage from local residents and the specialized recordings captured by the film crew, was sent to the Coastal Ocean Research Center in Los Angeles. There, under the analysis of director Michael Schacht, a veteran expert in oceanography, the initial findings left the entire production team in stunned silence. After examining every frame closely and measuring the entity's speed as it cut through the water, Mr. Schacht did not dismiss it as a hoax. Instead, he offered a heavily weighted conclusion. While the current data does not yet allow us to classify it with 100% certainty from a biological standpoint, we are dealing with an entity that appears to possess an extremely high level of adaptation to the aquatic environment. The hypothesis of a creature with a mermaid-like form is no longer mere fantasy, but a plausible possibility based on this empirical evidence. And my friends, what further strengthened the seriousness of this case file was the response from the authorities in Kiryat Yam. A city does not casually offer a reward of $1 million, a staggering sum large enough to shake any local budget, simply in exchange for a photograph of a joke. That reward remains on the table, even now. Like an unspoken challenge, an acknowledgement that they know something is out there beneath those waves. When we connect this with the case file on the Watcher's daughters, we begin to see a horrifying kind of logic. Biologically speaking, we know that water is the most perfect solvent for preserving life. If the Great Flood was a brutal cleansing aimed at creatures that walked upon the earth, then the ocean would have been the only true loophole in that judgment. Could it be that the ancient sirens, those beings carrying a hybrid bloodline between heaven and earth, were never destroyed at all? Instead, perhaps they carried out a great migration into the deep places, where light has never touched, choosing darkness as their refuge in order to preserve the DNA of the fallen ones. When we look at the entities reported in Israel, we see a strange alignment with the descriptions of the daughters of the Watchers. An unreal beauty that still carries a warning, a body that does not belong to Darwin's rules of evolution and the ability to vanish into nothingness in a matter of seconds. This is not the shyness of an animal. It is the caution of a being fully aware of its own place within the order of the world. They do not need legs to stand on cursed ground. They need the power of water to rule the places human beings cannot reach. But why now? Why are they allowing us to see them? Could it be that after thousands of years in hiding the boundary, we have always trusted is beginning to show cracks? Perhaps the rise in eyewitness reports in recent years is not random at all. It may be a sign that their cycle is returning, or simply that the ocean is no longer deep enough to conceal a truth this immense. I am genuinely curious about the steadiness of your reasoning, you who have lived long enough to know that this world does not operate only through what we are shown on the evening news. Was what NBC captured merely an elaborate arrangement designed to deceive the eye? Or were we just accidentally allowed to see through the veil that covers reality? There are some things that, once seen even a single time, leave your worldview unable to return to what it was before. Take a deep breath and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Because next we are going to decode the second layer of evidence, even more shocking than the footage from Israel. Mermaids discovered in Zimbabwe. Even the government had to admit it. My friends at our age, we have lived long enough to understand one thing clearly. No government on this planet delays major life-sustaining infrastructure projects worth millions of dollars because of a few empty rumors spread by dreamers. And yet, in the year 2012, something unprecedented happened in Zimbabwe that stunned the world. The Minister of Water Resources, Sam Sipepa Nkomo, was forced to stand before the Senate committee and acknowledge an unthinkable reality. Every worker at the massive dam projects in Gokwe and Mutare had fled in terror. Listen carefully to this. They were not merely repeating stories they had heard around a fire. They had faced something directly. Field reports described female-shaped entities of a violent nature repeatedly attacking, sabotaging equipment, and doing everything possible to drive out anyone who dared to trespass into their territory beneath the reservoir waters. At this point, the logical side of your mind may be speaking up. That was just superstition from poor local villagers, right? Wrong. This is the detail that overturns everything we thought we knew. When the local workers refused to return, Minister Nkomo made a highly rational decision. He hired white specialists, formally trained Western engineers, men who had no real connection to African siren legends and who trusted in machinery above all else. But my friends, the result was even more shocking. Those same white experts, after diving in to install the pumps, also fled in a state of overwhelming panic. They declared that they would never return to those dams, no matter how much money they were offered. They insisted that they had seen strange beings with non-human forms lurking in waters of extremely high-pressure places, where no ordinary creature should have been able to survive, much less deliberately attack human beings. The situation became so serious that the government of Zimbabwe, an official state authority, formally approved funds to bring in traditional leaders to perform rituals and spiritual cleansing ceremonies at the dams. They accepted compromise with the spiritual world in exchange for peace at the worksite. When we connect the pieces from Israel to Zimbabwe, a harsher truth begins to emerge, one that goes far beyond anything we have been taught about sirens in the West. To understand why the workers and engineers fled in terror, we have to understand this land's primal fear of the being they call Njuzu. In Zimbabwe, a nation with no sea at all, the legend of the mermaid is not a fairy tale. It is a threatening reality. Pastor Togar Mapingur is no stranger to the spiritual world. He oversees as many as 12 different congregations in that land. To Mapingur, belief in mermaids is not the superstition of the uneducated. He sees it as a serious and dangerous spiritual enterprise. He insists that Njuzu are real demonic forces possessing the power to abduct and kill anyone who dares to treat their mysterious laws lightly. This is not man trying to explain things he does not understand, Pastor Mapingur stressed with deep urgency. This is a real kingdom, a place where the one taken will vanish forever into nothingness, or may only reappear as an empty corpse if the family makes even the smallest mistake in the rituals of offering. But my friends, here is the detail that should truly stop us in our tracks. The missing piece that I believe may completely change the way you think about the siren myth. Listen with me to the story of Judge Manyonga, a living witness, a man who claims to have returned from the edge of death to tell what lies beneath the water's surface. Manyonga said he was captured by Njuzu and forced to remain in their kingdom for 2 full years. His description of these beings matches in a deeply unsettling way what we find in ancient texts about the image of the Watcher's daughters. Manyonga recounted it this way: "They do not look like anyone you have ever seen on land. Their hair is several meters long, covering their bodies like a living veil. Their skin carries an ethnicity you cannot define. At times they appear white, at times they seem Arab. But that beauty always carries an ancient authority that you cannot look away from. He described a kind of mermaid training school deep beneath the water, where he was forced to live and eat according to the strict rules of a superior race. Manyonga recalled the terrifying moment on the very first day when he was forced to eat rotting silver fish. They give you food and watch you. You must wear clothing that covers your legs and eat that rotten food without showing even the slightest sign of disgust. If you show contempt, the mermaids take it as an insult against their bloodline. They will be displeased with your ancestors, and the price you pay will be your life. My friends, think carefully about that detail. Why would a mythical creature care whether a human being feels disgust or respect toward its food? Why would they force human beings to learn herbal healing beneath the water? This is not the behavior of animals. This is the behavior of highly intelligent entity. These beings carrying the DNA of the Watchers. The same ones known from thousands of years ago as masters of forbidden knowledge, who always demanded absolute submission from humanity. But why are these beings so hostile toward modern technology? Local tribal chiefs explain that damming and blocking the flow at Mutare is like an act of torture against the nervous system of Injuzu. In their worldview, water is the blood of the earth. When we use steel and concrete to chain the flow of water, we are declaring war on the descendants of the fallen angels. Their rage is not random aggression. It is a form of inherited resistance. These reservoirs are the final liquid fortresses that have allowed them to survive through the ages without being detected by humanity. The presence of Western engineers with loud machines is a direct threat to the veil that has hidden their DNA. Ask yourselves this. Could it really be a coincidence that from Israel to Zimbabwe, all of these entities share the same traits? Extreme sensitivity to human presence, impossibly long hair, and a readiness to respond with supernatural power. This is not superstition. This is an ancient defense mechanism of a race carrying heavenly genetic code, struggling to remain on this earth at any cost. Now take a deep breath, because next, I am going to lead you into secret audio recordings and real-world images, the final layer of evidence that will force you to reconsider the entire history of humanity all over again. The Greenland encounter footage from 3,000 feet below. My dear friends, put aside the image of the beautiful mermaid from Disney cartoons, because what was recorded beneath the waters of Greenland at the beginning of the year 2013 will send chills down your spine. It was a video lasting 2 minutes and 17 seconds, first introduced in a fictional documentary titled Mermaids: The New Evidence, which aired on Animal Planet and Discovery Channel in the year 2013. Imagine that you are one of the 2 crewmen working under intense pressure inside a research submarine at a terrifying depth of 914 meters. At that depth, the water pressure is enough to crush anything not protected by armor. Then suddenly a pale, slender hand presses itself against the glass just behind the cameraman. It was not a fish fin, nor was it a tentacle. It was a hand with 5 fingers, but 4 of those fingers were joined together by a pitch-black membrane, like webbing on a duck's foot, yet far more threatening. When the sailor turned around, the camera captured the exact moment a creature glided past, with a face that was truly horrifying. There was no enchanting beauty here at all. Only an entity with glowing eyes, an evolutionary feature perfectly suited for seeing through the eternal darkness of the abyss. Now think logically with me for a moment. At a depth of nearly 1,000 meters, no diver could survive, and this creature was carrying no breathing equipment of any kind. It moved at a speed our technology could hardly keep up with. That leads to only one conclusion. We are dealing with a race whose biological structure goes far beyond humanity's understanding. I know that when this clip was released, mainstream media tried to explain it away as nothing more than staged fiction. But the biological precision it portrays aligns in a strangely exact way with eyewitness reports from Israel and Zimbabwe. Could it be that the filmmakers based it on a real prototype they were not yet ready to disclose? But to me, and perhaps to you as well. Those who understand that the ocean covers 70% of the Earth's surface. While we have explored less than 5% of it, Greenland is a cold and sobering reminder. Down there in that kingdom of darkness and pressure, the descendants of the Watcher's daughters are still alive, watching us from the other side of the submarine glass. The oceanic world has always contained mysteries that mainstream science does not dare to acknowledge. So what will you choose to believe, what you were taught in school, or the glowing eyes and webbed hand that touched the submarine window that day? The truth does not always lie on land. It is hiding in the deepest places human beings have ever dared to reach. To answer that question, we need to cast aside the shallow image of a beautiful Ariel, singing brightly in animated films. If you were truly underwater beside a Watcher's daughter, her voice would not be merely a sound. It would be a physical experience, and one that would shock you. How would a mermaid sound underwater? Before we go deeper into the thorough analysis offered by scholars, let us first travel back through time to understand why the name siren became a generational terror for sailors all over the world. In humanity's oldest epic songs, the voice of the mermaid was never described as a form of entertainment, but as a sweet death sentence. The ancient Greeks said that the daughters of the river gods and the muses, or perhaps the very descendants of the fallen angels we are searching for, possessed a kind of sound that existed beyond the human range. Legend says that when the sirens began to sing, the wind would stop blowing, the sea would go still like a sheet of paper, and the minds of the strongest men would completely melt away. It was not an ordinary melody. It was a sonic labyrinth of enchantment. The sailors who heard that song would forget their homeland, their wives, their children, even the task of steering the ship. They would throw themselves into the abyss or crash their vessel into the rocks just to touch the source of that heavenly sound. Even the hero Odysseus had to command his crew to plug their ears with beeswax and tie him tightly to the mast in order to survive passing their island. But if you strip away the outer shell of mythology, you will notice one remarkably consistent detail. That voice had no direction. Sailors described it this way. The song seemed to come from nowhere. It did not rise from one fixed direction, but echoed inside their heads, or vibrated up from beneath the hull of the ship, leaving them completely disoriented and falling into a hypnotic state. And this is where things become truly frightening. What the ancient world called magic, or an enchanted song, is actually the very way sound behaves underwater. Something science has only recently begun to explain. It is not vague mythology. It is a real physical phenomenon. To understand why their voices could wield such terrifying, mind-altering power, we have to look at auditory research from experts like Jasleen Singh at Northwestern University. She has pointed out that underwater sound does not reach our ears in the normal way. On land, we hear through the eardrum via air, but underwater, the situation is entirely different. When water fills the ear canal, the normal human hearing system is effectively disabled. At that point, you begin to hear through your own skull, a phenomenon known as bone conduction. Because water and bone have similar density, the vibrations from a mermaid's song would directly shake your skull, stimulating the cochlea without passing through any natural filter. You do not hear them with your ears. You feel them from inside the brain itself. Imagine a stream of sound with no detectable direction, because sound travels through water 4 times faster than it does through air. What is the result? A sound that is overwhelming, full-bodied, yet strangely diffuse, coming from every direction, at once creating an auditory delirium that leaves the victim completely unable to resist. But my friends, if these entities truly exist as descendants of the Watchers, then their vocal structure must be an astonishing genetic upgrade. Look at our oceanic relatives, whales, dolphins, and seals. According to biologist Colleen Reichmuth, marine mammals evolved extremely sophisticated hearing tools in order to survive. Dolphins possess special layers of fat in the lower jaw that act as conduits, carrying sound waves directly into the middle ear. Meanwhile, seals have shape-shifting ears that can fill with fluid while diving, balancing pressure and optimizing sound reception. And this is the crucial point about singing. Underwater air is the most precious currency there is. Human beings cannot sing underwater because we must exhale in order to create vocal vibration, a suicidal waste of oxygen. But deep-sea creatures do not need to do that. Anatomy expert Joy Reidenberg explains that whales and dolphins possess a perfect internal air recycling system. They do not exhale when they vocalize. Instead, they move air back and forth between internal sacs in the body to vibrate soft tissues. A mermaid carrying Nephilim genetic code would possess that same kind of system, allowing her to sing endlessly beneath the abyss without ever needing to rise for breath. And beyond that, the true power may lie in infrasound. If they possess a massive laryngeal structure like baleen whales, they could produce sounds at frequencies so low that the human ear cannot hear them. Yet, those frequencies can travel more than 1,000 kilometers through the ocean. That is not just singing. That is a biological radar network, a remote control system capable of summoning others of its kind or paralyzing prey from hundreds of miles away. And it does not end there. Their hybrid structure may also carry characteristics of fish and crustaceans. Marine ecologist Audrey Luby notes that the underwater world is actually very noisy. Fish can create sound by striking skull bones together or by using muscles to vibrate internal organs like drums. So a conversation among the Watcher's daughters could sound like a bizarre symphony, a combination of the melodic rises and falls of marine mammals, the clicking of skeletal structures, and sensory pulses moving along the sensitive cells lining the sides of the body. So what do we conclude from all of this? An entity able to recycle air in order to sustain a voice. Possessing a skull designed to program sound directly into another being's brain and capable of producing low frequencies strong enough to manipulate emotion across immense distances. That is not a creature of random evolution. That is an entity designed to dominate. The deadly allure in the siren legends is, in truth, an auditory assault aimed directly at the central nervous system. The moment you hear that song, the boundary between reality and illusion begins to dissolve. And now that we have stripped away the scientific layer behind their voice, prepare yourselves for the darkest part of this journey. Actual recordings of unexplained sounds from the abyss, what the military calls the bloop, but what those who understand the bloodline of the Nephilim call the call of the mother. The bloop, the call from the abyss of the mothers. My friends, we often take pride in humanity's achievements in conquering space. But there is an ironic truth. We must admit more people have set foot on the moon than have ever reached the deepest parts of the ocean. According to leading oceanography experts in the United States, more than 95% of life beneath the sea remains a complete mystery to humankind. We are living on a planet where we still do not truly know what rules the depths beneath our own feet. And in that vast darkness during the summer of 1997, an event took place that left the scientific world with a headache for 18 straight years. The United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, captured a low-frequency sound of immense amplitude through the SOS-US hydrophone network, which had originally been used to track former Soviet submarines. They gave it the name the bloop. Look closely at these telling numbers. That monster sound came from a depth of about 4.3 kilometers in a remote stretch of ocean, 1,750 kilometers west of Chile. What stunned military acoustic experts was not just the depth, but its terrifying intensity. The bloop was so powerful that hydrophone sensors placed as far as 5,000 kilometers apart picked it up clearly. The investigation began with a wave of fierce debate. At first, a group of biologists quickly suggested that it might be the call of a whale. But my friends, listen carefully to the result of the spectral analysis. Science quickly crushed that hope. The frequency of the bloop was greater than any animal-generated sound ever recorded by human beings. Even the largest blue whale, measuring 100 feet in length, would not be capable of producing a sound source powerful enough to travel 5,000 kilometers like that. To create such a sound, the originating creature would have to be many times larger than a blue whale, a monster hundreds of feet long. Next, military engineers stepped in to determine whether it might be some kind of secret weapon or the engine noise of a new generation submarine. But once again, the conclusion led nowhere. The sound was confirmed not to be man-made. It lacked the mechanical signatures of an engine. It carried none of the repetition of machinery. It had a changing biological rhythm, a kind of breath of life, but on a scale beyond our comprehension. Even geologists tried to find similarities between it and undersea earthquakes or volcanic activity, but the result: there was no geological disturbance of any kind matching the exact moment when the sound was emitted. The research community was completely stuck. That dead end opened the door to more extreme theories, from prehistoric sea monsters to alien bases hidden beneath the ocean. Fans of strange literature shuddered when they discovered that the coordinates of the bloop lay uncannily close to the location of R'lyeh, the sunken city, in the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, where the great monster Cthulhu lies imprisoned. Could this have been the cry of some tentacled entity beginning to awaken? Then, in the year 2008, a more comforting explanation appeared. While tracking the massive iceberg A53A as it neared collapse by South Georgia Island, scientists found that the cracking sounds of enormous ice masses could produce similar sound intensity. They hurried to announce, "The mystery has been solved. It was only ice cracking." But my friends, does that answer truly satisfy logical minds like yours and mine? Why would a random crack in the ice carry the organic rhythm of a living creature? Why would it appear at coordinates so deeply linked to some of the oldest myths on Earth? And this is where we must cross beyond the boundary of mainstream science and brush against a far more horrifying possibility. If the bloop was not the sound of cracking ice, and it was not the cry of a whale, then it could only be the call of something whose size surpasses our imagination, a colossal entity carrying the DNA of the fallen ones. When I connect it to the case file on the Watcher's daughters, I begin to see a chilling logic. We have already analyzed the upgraded vocal system of the sirens, their ability to produce infrasonic waves across the oceans. So what Noah recorded in the year 1997 was not a geological accident. It was the call of the mother, a primordial entity, a gigantic female Nephilim from before the flood, sending out a global summons. That sound from a depth of 4.3 kilometers was a vibration aimed directly at the DNA of her descendants hiding across the world. The giants at the bottom of the ocean never disappeared. They are simply waiting for the signal to rise. Personally, I believe the military knew exactly what the bloop was from the very first moment. The cracking ice explanation was offered only to conceal a greater fear that we are not the only ones ruling this planet. There is a kingdom of giants beneath our feet, breathing, calling, and waiting. Do not leave yet, because next I am going to reveal leaked documents about secret Navy acoustic experiments where they tried to replicate this call and received horrifying responses from the ocean floor. The U.S. Navy's high-intensity sonar testing incident and the sounds echoing up from the abyss. My friends, sometimes we need to stop looking up at the sky and start looking down beneath our own feet. When people think about the ocean, we usually dream of waves, whales, and ships gliding across sunlit water. But for the military, the ocean has long been a silent battlefield, where sound is the only pair of eyes capable of tracking objects hidden in absolute darkness. Out of that need for survival, the U.S. Navy developed high-powered active sonar systems to detect submarines at long range. One of the most controversial programs was called SURTA-SSLFA, Sonar the Surveillance Towed Array Sensor System. Low-frequency active sonar. According to official documents from the Navy and NOAA, this system operates in the range of 100 to 500 hertz, emitting sequences of signals lasting from a few seconds to more than a minute. Its objective is very clear: to detect submarines that have become increasingly quiet in the vast ocean. But my friends, this is exactly where the story begins to shift from military technology into a gray zone filled with mystery. In our imagination, very low frequencies always carry a special weight. They travel far, penetrate deeply, and create the feeling that they are awakening something that has been lying at the bottom of the sea for a very long time. So when the public heard about these sonar experiments and then remembered strange sounds like the bloop, a chain of association, appeared almost immediately, many began to wonder, had the military ever accidentally struck the frequency range of some gigantic creature or touched a region of water humanity had never truly understood? And yet, I want you to look first at the layer of evidence that has actually been verified. The bloop now has a fairly clear official explanation. NOAA has stated that the sound recorded in the year 1997 is consistent with an ice quake, the sound of large-scale ice cracking in the Antarctic region. Scientists have recorded many similar sound signatures from cracking icebergs with intensity great enough for sensors more than 5,000 kilometers apart to detect them at the same time. That means the first anchor point of the story has been fixed in the current scientific record. The bloop is tied to Antarctic ice, not yet to an unknown creature. And yet, my friends, it is often when one mystery is solved that another begins to rise, because the larger question still remains. If high-powered sonar truly travels that deep and that far, then how does it affect creatures that live by sound in the darkness? And deeper still, during those transmissions, has humanity ever received responses it did not fully understand? Officially, the purpose of LFA sonar is straightforward long-range submarine detection. The U.S. government has repeatedly authorized its use under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, but always accompanied by an elaborate mitigation framework, maintaining distance from coastlines, conducting visual observation, and performing acoustic monitoring. The very existence of those rules is itself an admission that high-intensity underwater sound can produce severe biological effects. And this is where physical evidence enters the picture. One of the most haunting incidents was the mass whale stranding in the Bahamas in March of the year 2000. 17 whales stranded themselves within 36 hours, matching perfectly in both time and location with U.S. Navy mid-frequency tactical sonar activity. The investigative team concluded that the source of the animal's acoustic trauma was that sonar system. Necropsies documented injuries around the ears, auditory hemorrhaging, and damage to brain tissue. Although the Bahamas event involved mid-frequency sonar, not LFA sonar, it proved one fundamental point. When human beings send high-powered military sound into the deep sea, the bodies of marine animals can respond in the most catastrophic ways. A study published in Veterinary Pathology described congestion, widespread hemorrhaging, and fat emboli in whales, suggesting a horrifying form of decompression sickness caused by sudden changes in diving behavior under panic. In other words, sonar does not need to kill with a direct blow. It disrupts instinct, causing the animal to destroy itself from within. That is far more chilling than the simple image of a loud noise. From there, mysterious theories begin to slip into the gap between evidence and fear. People have said that the Navy once tried to call down into the deepest trenches, such as the Mariana Trench or the Puerto Rico Trench, and received responses with strange structure and such abnormal rhythm that computers could not classify them. Some rumors even claimed that sailors experienced nausea and panic, as if their own bodies were reacting to some form of infrasound echoing back up from the abyss. We need to remain cautious. It is true that the deep ocean often produces far more strange sounds than we imagine, but science usually traces them back to biological sources. Mechanical sounding noises from the Mariana region were later identified as calls from bride's whales. That shows us that the deep sea can generate signals that sound artificial, even when the source is a real living creature. In addition, Feelings of nausea or dizziness during exposure to infrasound have also been documented in occupational medicine on land. So if you are searching for a truth that feels overwhelming and unsettling, the strongest point lies in this public record itself, an ocean full of complex signals where ice can sound like monsters, whales can sing like machines, and military sonar can tear through marine life in ways that leave us shuddering. It is precisely in that blurred space between what is known and what is still left open that the greatest mystery truly exists. But my friends, if military sonar has only allowed us to hear echoes rising from the abyss, then there are classified files from the other side of the old front line, the former Soviet side, that recorded far more brutal face-to-face encounters. We are no longer talking merely about sound waves. We are talking about flesh and blood entities willing to kill in order to defend their territory beneath Lake Baikal. The Baikal file on the tailless entities. My friends, there is one deadly mistake we often make when we talk about mermaids. We assume they must have a shimmering fishtail. But if you dig into the classified reports of the former Soviet Navy, you will discover a truth far more chilling. The descendants of the fallen angels, the Watcher's daughters, are not confined to the saltwater oceans. They control even the deepest veins of the continents. Look at what happened at Lake Baikal in the year 1982. This was not a sea, but the oldest and deepest freshwater lake in the world, reaching a maximum depth of about 1,620 meters and holding more than 1/5 of all the unfrozen fresh surface water on Earth. Lake Baikal is so deep that the thought of people conducting military dive training there is enough by itself to create psychological pressure. Perhaps that is exactly why the Soviet military once chose it as a training environment, harsh, cold, deep, silent, and capable of placing enormous psychological strain on any diver who descended into it. The water is strangely clear, but the deeper you go, the more the light is swallowed, the tighter the cold wraps around your body, and the more your sense of direction begins to dissolve. In places like that, all a human being has left is breath, heartbeat, and the sharp awareness that he is entering a world that does not belong to the land. And it was there that one of the most mysterious military legends of the post-Soviet era was born. It happened in the year 1982, during a secret military exercise at a depth of 50 meters, when elite Soviet divers were stunned to come face to face with beings they called the swimmers. Listen carefully to the description given by the witnesses themselves. They said these beings stood more than 3 meters tall with human-like form, yet their skin shimmered silver like fish scales beneath the divers' flashlights. They had no air tanks, no support equipment, and moved through the freezing Siberian water with inhuman speed. The only thing covering their faces was a transparent spherical helmet. But many researchers believe it was not a helmet at all, but part of a biological structure that allowed them to regulate extreme pressure from within their own bodies. After discovering these abnormally tall entities beneath the lake, the Soviet elite divers did not retreat. They were ordered to use nets to capture one at any cost. But my friends, at the exact moment they cast the net, at the very instant humanity tried to assert dominion over nature, an immense force of unknown origin struck like a slap from the ocean itself. It blasted the entire team out of the deep zone and hurled them straight up to the surface of the lake at a horrifying speed. In the professional diving world, that kind of ascent is a death sentence. Modern medicine, specifically specialists from Divers Alert Network, calls it decompression illness. At a depth of 50 meters, the nitrogen dissolved in your tissues and blood vessels is stable under enormous pressure. But if you are thrown to the surface too quickly, those gas bubbles burst out suddenly, like opening a violently shaken bottle of soda. And the result of the encounter at Baikal, 3 men died immediately, and the survivors were left with severe lifelong injuries. This is no longer some stray legend. The biological aftermath is too real, too consistent with medical reality, and it sends a chill through the spine. It turns a post-Soviet military story into a fear that sinks deep into the mind of anyone who has ever dived into deep water. But why has this story remained hidden, and why has it endured so stubbornly? There is one truth that people with life experience like yours will understand. In the borderlands between light and darkness, between knowledge and fear, human beings always feel as though they are standing very near another layer of the world's presence. Baikal, with its enormous depth and the oppressive atmosphere of Siberia, seems almost destined to conceal entities far beyond our understanding. Living beings that move naturally in an environment human beings can endure only through technology. The reality is, this Lake Baikal is real. Decompression accidents are real, and highly trained military divers became terrified witnesses. But if we stop only at the level of medicine or military accident, we will miss a much bigger picture. Why did those divers describe these beings as giants with silver skin? The answer may not lie in declassified KGB reports, but in the blood and memory of that land itself. In ancient Eastern texts and Slavic mythology, these entities are not unfamiliar at all. They are called rusalka freshwater mermaids, but forget the image of fragile maidens. In their original form, rusalki were powerful beings. They did not need shimmering fishtails in order to swim. They possessed webbed legs and an extraordinary ability to alter their body structure in order to adapt perfectly between water and land. What happened at Baikal that year was not really an accident, but a collision between two civilizations. When the military divers tried to use a net to capture one of them, an obvious act of territorial violation, the response came instantly. No advanced weaponry, no guns. Just a burst of impulse energy, which I believe was the very infrasonic force we analyzed earlier, and they hurled the entire diving team up to the surface of the lake at blinding speed. The result was the military tragedy we just spoke of, above 3 men dead immediately from decompression injury, their lungs torn apart, and the rest crippled for life. This was not the aggression of an instinct-driven animal. This was the cold punishment of a superior race against those who dared approach a forbidden zone. And if those theories are true, then perhaps Nephilim blood running through them allows them to dominate both at a depth of 4.3 kilometers beneath the cold waters off Chile in the case of the bloop, and in the depths of a freshwater lake in the heart of the Russian continent. They are the warrior version of the mermaid, the guardians of gateways leading into the depths of the earth, places humanity was never meant to touch. And if you still think mermaids are nothing more than girls sitting on rocks and singing according to a Hollywood script, then Baikal is the sharpest warning of all. They are gigantic entities wearing natural biological armor and possessing the power to control water pressure in order to take human life in an instant. So after all the files we have walked through from the ocean floor to the depths beneath the earth, do you believe this is only a coincidence of occupational accidents? Or is there truly another kingdom moving alongside us beneath those waters? Leave your thoughts below, because the truth is sometimes darker than anything we dare imagine. The battle beneath Lake Baikal proved the warrior power of the Nephilim bloodline. But that was not the whole story. These watchers are not hiding only beneath depths of 4,000 meters or in lonely lakes in Siberia. They are everywhere, slipping into the memories of fishermen and into the lenses of travelers. Right now, come with me as we revisit the chain of classic encounter cases across the continents, from remote inlets in Scotland to the white sands of South Africa. A wave of appearances is unfolding more forcefully than ever, reinforcing one truth. We were not mistaken. They really are here. Records of half-human, half-fish beings go back about 4,000 years. Yes, my friends, you heard that correctly. To understand why the image of the mer being carries such terrifying spiritual force, we have to turn the clock back more than 4,000 years to the legendary land of Mesopotamia. The oldest records of half-human, half-fish beings did not begin with romantic tales. They began with reverence for Ea, also known as Enki, the supreme god of wisdom and fresh water. In the flow of ancient Babylonian history around 1894 to 1595 before Christ, Ea did not appear as a beautiful mermaid, but as a being of immense power with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a fish with gleaming silver scales. He did not merely dwell in the deep ocean, but was believed to live in the Abzu, a freshwater kingdom hidden deep beneath the earth, the source of every river and all life. Ea was in the fullest sense the god of purification and magic. Ancient clay tablets describe him as the keeper of the Mi, the sacred laws that govern the universe. As a god of purification, he used water to drive away evil spirits and disease, while also ruling over the art of enchantment, turning the impossible into the possible. But even more astonishing was his role as an architect of humanity. Ea was the god who gave form, the one who directly shaped man from clay, and became the patron of every craftsman and artist, of all those who turn ideas into matter. Ea's presence was so important that his fishman image became a cultural genetic code that could never be erased. Later, when the Babylonian Empire declined, the civilizations that followed Greece and Rome inherited this prototype of the half-man, half-fish deity. They distilled Ea's authority over the waters and reshaped it into the figures of Poseidon and Neptune. Though his appearance changed into that of a powerful man holding a trident, the essence of a god who ruled the abyss and the raging waves remained intact from its Babylonian roots. The image of Ea stands as powerful evidence that from the very dawn of humanity, people recognized a mysterious spiritual connection between supreme intelligence and the underwater world. The original mer being was not a creature to be admired from afar, but a god to be feared, a being who held the keys to magic itself and to the life source of an entire civilization. The next major turning point brings us to Assyria, where the concept of the mermaid was first explicitly named in written record. These earliest stories go back to around 1000 before Christ and tell of the Syrian goddess Atargatis. The story says that she fell in love with a mortal shepherd, but accidentally killed him. In her overwhelming shame and grief, the goddess Atargatis fell into terrible trauma. In that broken state, she felt unworthy of her radiant temple and unable to face the sunlight. She cast herself into a deep lake in Syria, intending to abandon her heavenly form and become a fish, burying her memory and beauty forever beneath the mud. But there was one thing even she had not foreseen. No matter how deep the cold water was, it could not conceal divine radiance. Her body could not fully disappear beneath dry fish scales, and so a transformation both agonizing and beautiful took place. A hybrid being was formed. Her legs dissolved into a tail that shimmered like silver, while her upper body retained the breathtaking beauty of a goddess. That tragic moment gave birth to the mermaid image we know today. Atargatis did not die. She was reborn, stronger, becoming a goddess of fertility and happiness. The people of ancient Syria revered her so deeply that they built massive temples in her honor, always centered around a sacred pool full of fish, a symbol of her presence. During the Neo-Assyrian period, statues of fishmen and maidens with fish tails were not merely decorative objects. They were placed at city gates and inside palaces as powerful protective figures, keeping away every evil force. That reverence endured so strongly that centuries later, when the ancient Greeks arrived in the region, they bowed before that chilling beauty and drew her into their own mythology under the name Der Kato, my friends. When we look at Atargatis, what do we see? Not merely a tragic love story. It is evidence that a being carrying heavenly DNA could transform and rule the aquatic environment with astonishing ease. And perhaps it was in those ancient temples that humanity first began to sense the fragile boundary between deity and monster, between enchanting beauty and the punishment of the sea. When we move into the age of conquerors, the influence of these beings even reached royal bloodlines. It is said that the sister of Alexander the Great Thessalonic was transformed into a mermaid after her death in the year 295 after Christ. Today we make a clearer distinction between mermaids and mermen than the ancient Greeks did, since they often treated the two as one. Folk tradition says that Thessalonike still lives in the Aegean Sea, and whenever ships pass by, she rises from the water to ask sailors a single question: is King Alexander still alive? If they answer, he lives and he still reigns and conquers the world, she allows them to continue their journey safely. But any other answer brings down her fury, and the ship is swallowed in violent waves. It was this mixture of reverence and terror that helped shape the Greek word siren, meaning the entangler or the binder. It was a severe reminder that these beings could enchant sailors with seductive songs that were irresistible and deadly at the same time. It is important to note that in that era, sirens were often described as half woman, half bird. It was only during the Christian period that the image gradually shifted toward half woman, half fish. And only later did people begin to distinguish clearly between mermaids and other deadly seductive beings of the water. Their terror is portrayed at its height in Homer's Odyssey around 725 to 675 before Christ, where the mermaids appear as cunning and bloodthirsty beings. The true horror and power of these entities fully explode when we enter the age of epic literature and Roman field reports. These were no longer static religious symbols, but encounters drenched in blood and tears. The peak of that horror is portrayed in Homer's Odyssey, composed around 725 to 675 before Christ. Here the mermaids do not appear in gentle beauty. They are sirens, cunning, bloodthirsty beings armed with an invisible but lethal weapon sound. Their song was not music, but a kind of infrasonic frequency capable of breaking the will, penetrating directly into the central nervous system and driving the victim to throw himself into the abyss. Picture the scene when the hero Odysseus had to make a brutal decision in order to protect his crew. He ordered everyone to plug their ears with thick beeswax, making them temporarily deaf before entering the territory of the sirens. As for Odysseus himself, because he longed to understand that heavenly power, he ordered his men to tie him tightly to the mast with the strongest ropes they had. When the song began, Odysseus screamed, writhed in madness, and begged to be untied so he could leap into the sea. Not because he wanted to die, but because his brain had been completely reprogrammed by that demonic sound. The image of the hero bound to the mast, surrounded by shattered ships, became an eternal symbol of the fragile boundary between human curiosity and the trap set by ancient beings. Hundreds of years later, this mystery no longer remained inside epic poetry, but entered directly into the scientific reports of the Roman Empire. The famous historian and biographer, Pliny the Elder, devoted his life to bringing these legends into the light in his monumental work, Natural History. He did not speak of distant myths, but described actual reports of mer-beings seen off the coast of Gaul in what is now France. Pliny described them as real entities with bodies covered in hard, sharp, horn-like scales. More horrifying still, he recorded that the corpses of these beings often washed ashore, revealing a strange anatomy between man and fish that left the educated classes of the time in shock. The matter became so serious that the governor of Gaul reportedly wrote directly to Emperor Augustus, the most powerful man in the world at that time, warning him of the presence of these beings. They were not treated as monsters in a tale, but as a real concern of the empire, a continuing threat to Roman fleets trying to dominate the seas. My friends, when the greatest explorers and the mightiest emperors all kept records about them, we have to ask, could the bloodthirsty beings described by Homer actually have been warriors, guarding the boundary of an underworld humanity was never meant to enter? So then, from the gods who ruled supreme magic in Babylon to the deeply concerned reports sent to the Roman emperor, we see one thread running through thousands of years of history. These beings were never mere products of imagination or the idle fantasies of fishermen. They were an inseparable part of ancient geopolitics, the guardians of the sacred boundary between humanity and the deep ocean. But my friends, if you think all of this ended and turned to dust along with the fall of the ancient empires, then perhaps you are mistaken. The truth is far more terrifying than that, because now we are stepping out of yellowed manuscripts and straight into the 21st century, the age of technology and total surveillance. This is the era in which digital cameras, advanced sonar systems, and even the most battle-hardened military divers have accidentally captured direct flesh and blood confrontations. These modern pieces of evidence reinforce a chilling truth. The binders of ancient Greece, the bloodthirsty sirens of Homer's epic, are still silently present, still hunting and still ruling just beneath our noses. Are you ready to face the footage? Governments have always wanted to hide. Hold tight to the oar, because the waters ahead will no longer be mythology. They are reality. 600 years of unexplainable mermaid encounters. My friends, we have already passed through the cold military reports from Baikal and the deep ocean trenches. But to understand why the files on the Watcher's daughters are so terrifying, we have to look at the flow of history. For the past 600 years, from some of humanity's greatest explorers to soldiers in the world wars, they have all left behind records that modern science continues to ignore. This is not fairy tale. These are field reports. Let us begin with the event in the year 1403 at Edam in the Netherlands. After a catastrophic flood broke the dikes, the waters receded so quickly that they left behind a horrifying gift. On the mudflats, a mermaid stranded there, struggling desperately as she tried to crawl back toward the water. She was found by a group of local women while trying to drag herself toward the current. According to the detailed record in Speculum Mundi published in the year 1635 by the English minister John Swan, this being was nothing like the bloodthirsty monsters of epic poetry. But neither was she fully human. After being taken to the town of Haarlem, this mermaid caused a historical sensation. Instead of being imprisoned like some strange creature, she underwent an astonishing process of humanization that lasted for 15 years. John Swan wrote that she adapted to life on land. In a strangely natural way, she learned how to wear fine clothing, to dine with human beings, and even to bow before religious symbols. She especially loved strolling in the garden and quietly listening to ladies speak for hours at a time. And yet, there was one boundary she never crossed. She never once opened her lips to speak. Though she could hear and understand, her vocal cords seemed not to be designed to produce human language. Or perhaps she was guarding secrets humanity was not worthy to hear, until the final day of her life, when she was buried according to the rites of a believer in the local cemetery. This being remained a silent mystery. The event in the Netherlands proved the astonishing ability of these entities to adapt on land. But my friends, that was not the only time they crossed paths with the human world in a way that cannot be denied. Less than a century later, on the far side of the ocean, one of the most powerful and rational men in maritime history was forced to take up his own pen and record a similar encounter. That man was Christopher Columbus. In January of 1493, during his historic voyage to the New World, while his ship was anchored near the waters of what is now the Dominican Republic, Columbus recorded a shocking event. In the wild waves of the Atlantic, he personally saw 3 mermaids rise high out of the water. But forget the graceful images painted by Renaissance artists. With the mindset of a field explorer, Columbus wrote in his journal, in a tone that sounded disappointed, yet deeply truthful. El día pasado, cuando el almirante iba a Río del Oro, dijo que vio 3 sirenas que salieron bien alto de la mar, pero no eran tan hermosas como las pintan, que en alguna manera tenían forma de hombre en la cara. Dijo que otras veces vio algunas en Guinea, en la costa de la Manegueta. This statement from Columbus carries enormous weight. He was not a dreamer. He was a hardened captain who had spent his life studying the sea, so he was not someone likely to mistake what he saw. Columbus emphasized that they were not as beautiful as they are painted. That shows he was observing them through the eyes of a field anthropologist, not through an alcohol haze or the loneliness of life at sea. These beings may have had rough skin faces altered by water pressure or anatomical traits adapted to deep marine environments that would naturally appear ugly and difficult to look at to ordinary human eyes. At the same time, the detail that they had a human form in the face was a genuine shock. It strengthens your theory of a hybrid Nephilim bloodline. This was not a fish face, but a strange human face, almost alien. He also noted that he had seen similar creatures off the coast of West Africa, suggesting that this race was once widespread. So for those who believe in the files on the Watcher's daughters, Columbus's record is a crucial piece of evidence. It shows that they were present everywhere on the maritime map, from the muddy flats of the Netherlands to the far waters of the Americas. They were not hiding. They were watching us from beneath the water, with faces Columbus himself admitted were human enough to be unsettling. The existence of mer-beings in history is not a single-color portrait, but a file on a real race with many different forms, much as humanity itself exists in many different ethnicities across the continents. If Christopher Columbus described rougher, more frightening beings near Dominica, then that was only one glimpse of the warriors guarding dangerous waters. To strengthen the case for the varied presence of this race, we must look at the report of another maritime legend, Captain John Smith. In the year 1614, off the coast of Newfoundland, Smith encountered an entity of a completely different form, proof that their existence is far more refined and diverse than we imagine. In the book, Incredible Mysteries and Legends of the Sea, Edward Snow preserved a detailed account of this encounter. Unlike the rough-faced beings Columbus reported, John Smith described a mermaid swimming toward the side of his ship with a beauty that was almost impossible to put into words. He personally observed this being with large, intelligent eyes, a straight nose, and most striking of all, long green hair, a perfectly adapted biological feature for blending into ocean water. Before that unreal beauty, even a man of steel like Smith felt himself stirred. He was captivated by the flawless upper body of the woman before him, until harsh reality broke through. The creature flicked herself and revealed that everything from the waist down was entirely fish. John Smith's testimony does not contradict Columbus's report. On the contrary, it completes the picture of their existence. This race possesses different forms for different purposes. While Columbus encountered rougher entities in violent waters, John Smith encountered a masterpiece of creation. In the archive material quoted by Edward Snow, John Smith recorded his astonishment over the event of 1614 in these words: "I saw with my own eyes a creature swimming with enchanting grace right beside the ship. It was a woman with large, intelligent eyes and a perfectly straight nose. Her hair was long, of a strange green hue, and drifted through the water like mist, creating a beauty difficult to resist. I stood frozen, gazing at that face, a beauty beyond all description, until she suddenly turned herself. At that very moment, I was stunned to realize that from the waist down, she was entirely fish." My friends, pay close attention to this detail. Smith did not merely see a shadow underwater. He saw the nose, the eyes, the ears, and the green hair. These are clear anthropological features. The fact that a battle-hardened man, a seasoned warrior like John Smith, admitted that he was emotionally stirred reveals just how powerful this biological trap truly was. It was not a hallucination caused by emotional deprivation at sea, but a direct interaction with an intelligent entity of supernatural beauty. The existence of this creature was so concrete that it was no longer merely a secret among sailors. It stepped into the light and became a hot subject in the newspapers, forcing both the public and the ruling class of that time to reconsider what was truly hiding beneath the ocean. But my friends, when we trace the stories of sea people through old records from local newspapers, maritime folklore collections, to postmodern retellings, a very strange picture begins to emerge. Some stories carry the tone of serious 18th century newspaper reports. Others live on strongly in local folk culture, and still others survive mainly inside cryptid collections. That very mixture is what makes this subject both fascinating and in need of absolute sobriety, because each link in the chain has to be placed exactly where it belongs. What is an original document? What is a legend, retold across generations? And what is a later layer of interpretation added afterward to conceal the truth? From here we can move into the next story, and for me it is the most visually disturbing one I have ever encountered. In August of 1991, in South Africa, a report began spreading rapidly through Mermaid sighting collections. It was said that about 30% of the remains of a strange creature had been found inside the stomach of a dead great white shark. According to the most widely circulated and most shocking version of the story, what remained of the body was enough to horrify anyone who saw it, because they could make out the structure of a human-like hand and skull. But the most striking detail was this: lodged inside the jaws of the great white shark, they reportedly found a stingray barb. From that, a dramatic interpretation took shape. This creature had not submitted quietly to death. It had used that barb as a final defensive weapon in a bloody battle beneath the ocean floor. The story sounds like a scene torn straight out of a horror film, rising up from the abyss. And yet, as seekers of truth, when we trace it back to its source, the South Africa case appears in a very particular form. This chain of descriptions appears densely on mystery roundup sites and occult blogs, while the trail of forensic reports or independent scientific publications remains extremely faint. On the other side, forensic science and anthropology do have very clear documentation of sharks tearing into human remains. Forensic studies record many cases in which remains were recovered from shark stomachs, and they describe how shark teeth leave distinctive marks on bone. That means the part about a shark containing remains lies firmly within real biology. But the part about a strange being with a human hand and a battle weapon is what survives most powerfully in the layer of postmodern oral retelling. That gap between biological fact and mysterious interpretation is exactly what has given the South Africa case its lasting life as a deep-sea legend. It attaches itself to a real biological mechanism, a corpse inside a shark, and then covers it with a horrifying layer of interpretation that the public finds nearly impossible to forget. Could it be that this is how the truth about the Watcher's daughters was encoded into oral stories? To avoid the scrutiny of censorship systems? Or is it simply humanity's primal fear of whatever the ocean is trying to swallow and erase? The discrepancy between forensic evidence and rumor in the South Africa case may make us skeptical. But my friend, sometimes the truth is not found in modern laboratories. Sometimes it gets trapped in the hidden corners of history where the smoke and fire of war have blurred the line between reality and illusion, leaving behind the cold waters and forensic controversies of South Africa. The next story takes us into a completely different setting: war, remote islands, and the memories of Japanese soldiers in the midst of World War II. This is the file on orang-ikan military witnesses in Indonesia, 1943. In the fires of war in 1943 across the K Islands of Indonesia, a chain of reports emerged connected to the name orang-ikan, meaning fish person in Malay. Japanese soldiers stationed there reported that they repeatedly heard local people speak of strange creatures living around swamps and remote shorelines. Most striking of all is the testimony of Sergeant Taro Horiba, sometimes recorded in Japanese retellings as Koma Taro Horiba. He claimed that he personally saw the body of a creature about 1.5 meters long washed up on the shore. Horiba's description was extremely detailed and deeply unsettling. A being with pale pink skin, a face bearing human features, yet with a mouth broad and coarse like that of a carp, along with sharp spines running from the head down the neck. In some other retellings, Horiba even claimed that he saw living individuals crawling low across the sand or swimming just beneath the surface with an inhuman kind of grace. Although Horiba tried to persuade Japanese scientists to conduct field research, the scholars of that time dismissed it outright, saying it was nothing more than hallucinations born of wartime exhaustion and fear. That conservatism may have unintentionally buried one of the most valuable living traces of a superior race hiding within the coral trenches of Southeast Asia. What makes Orang Ikan especially striking is the structure of its sources. The story appears very clearly on Japanese sites dedicated to strange phenomena and in international cryptozoology writing. What astonishes me is the strange stability of the details. The year 1943, the K Islands Horiba himself, and the identifying traits, pink skin, fish mouth, spines on the head. That consistency gives Orang Ikan its own cultural weight. It suggests that this legend was not some random lie improvised on the spot, but had reached a level of completeness that allowed it to move from traumatic wartime memory into modern folklore. Even though at the current level of documentation, its strength comes more from repeated testimony than from official scientific records for an audience like ours, this kind of war memory turned local legend always creates an unusually powerful feeling. From the swamps of Southeast Asia, the thread of our story continues westward, crossing the Atlantic into North America, where even older and harsher descriptions appear under the pens of people from earlier centuries. Let us begin in Spain in the year 1737. Near Vigo, a shocking report was preserved in collections of 18th century news writing. Fishermen there reportedly caught a merman with anatomical features startling enough to leave any scientist speechless. This being stood about 1 meter 65 centimeters tall. But its appearance was a challenge to every idea of beauty, a head like a goat with a long shaggy beard, and mustached dark skin covered with a thin layer of hair and a neck of unnatural length. More frightening still, its hands were far too large for normal proportion, with long fingers ending in sharp nails, like demonic claws. Its feet had no separate toes, only thick webbing like waterfowl feet, along with a large fin running along the lower back. This is how 18th century Europeans looked at the world. They did not romanticize it. They measured it, named it, and described each feature in detail, as though dissecting a natural wonder filled with unknowns. Then, nearly a century and a half later, at Cape Breton, Canada, in the year 1886, another being appeared with an entirely different character. The Cape Brooklyn Eagle of August 22nd of that year recorded the deeply unsettling encounter of a group of fishermen from Gabarus. At first, they thought it was a floating corpse. But when they drew closer, the corpse suddenly turned, sat upright on the water, and looked directly into their eyes. Imagine that feeling. A being with a face, shoulders, and arms astonishingly human, but with long black hair as thick as a horse's mane, and hands with absurdly long fingers. It did not attack. It simply sat there, watching the men with cold calm, and then vanished beneath the frigid sea. At this point, the picture of the Watcher's daughters becomes sharply defined. In Spain, we see a savage form, the appearance of predators. In Canada, we see a being of intelligence silently observing us from the threshold between two worlds. And in Indonesia, we see spined entities with fierce territorial instinct. Why the difference? Because we are dealing with a race that changes according to region, water, and climate. The common thread lies in the structure of the human-like arms and a mind of superior intelligence. The differences in hairbeard, skin, or dorsal fin are evidence of the Nephilim bloodline's absolute genetic adaptability. But my friends, one great question has to be asked. Why does popular cinema deliberately beautify these beings? Why turn giant spined, powerful entities into harmless romantic symbols who sing songs in order to sell tickets to children? Part of the answer lies in the history of symbols themselves. The mermaid has long been an image that is both seductive and easy to commercialize, perfect for storytelling, paintings, maritime signs, and popular culture. By contrast, The older accounts preserve an entirely different tone. Fishermen seeing what looked like a corpse, only for it to sit up and stare directly at the boat. Old newspapers describing beards, claws, webbed feet, dorsal fins, and bodies twisted away from normal human form. Wartime soldiers describing spined creatures swimming just beneath the surface as though those waters belonged to them. When a symbol enters popular culture, the gentler side usually survives better than the violent one. But in old notebooks, local newspapers, and fishing folklore, that violent layer remains intact as a reminder that the sea in human memory has always been far wider than anything illustration ever tried to show. That is why the greatest value of old journals, provincial news clippings, and stories from remote islands lies in this. They open a window into the way generation after generation of human beings experience the ocean. Each report, whether it is an 18th century item, a local Canadian news story, or the testimony of Japanese soldiers in K, carries the same feeling beneath the water. There is always another living layer. One that sometimes reveals itself for only a few seconds, just long enough to create a story, and then sinks back down precisely where human sight comes to an end. It is a severe reminder that the sea is far larger and more frightening than any illustration ever showed us. The value of these old clippings and stories from Japanese soldiers on K Island lies in the fact that they open up another living layer of Earth itself. A world in which human beings are not the top of the food chain. Each report appears for only a few seconds, just long enough to create a legend, and then sinks back down into the place where human sight stops. But sometimes it is precisely those forgotten notes that show us most clearly how fear and wonder built one of humanity's most enduring truths. They are still living down there right beneath our feet in the deep blue ocean that has never been fully explored. The Forgotten Link in the North Sea, the Orne File, 1890. If the story in Indonesia was the memory of soldiers in the midst of war, then the file from the Orne Islands, Scotland in the year 1890 stands as powerful proof of the presence of these entities in the very heart of European civilization. This was a case that my friends, the authorities, chose to declare dead in the official record. Yet the truth still managed to survive in deeply disturbing private journals. Picture that afternoon in June of that year. 6 men returned from the open waters in a single boat. But when they reached the harbor, something strange happened. Not one of them spoke for nearly an hour. That silence was so unnatural that George Wemyss, the harbor master, felt compelled to record it in his journal as a sign of something abnormal. He understood that for fishermen known for being blunt and noisy, absolute silence was not the result of fatigue. It was mass psychological shock. They were silent because they had just seen something for which human language had no adequate word. Wemyss waited patiently for the moment when that silence finally broke into frightened whispers, and then quietly filed the report under a category that had no precedent, nature unclassified. Because in the world of investigators, silence is the gap between reality and understanding. It is evidence that these men had truly come face to face with an entity that did not belong to our world. When the bow of the boat came close to those gray rocks, the sailors confronted a truth more unsettling than disappearance itself. George Wemyss, in a note meant only for internal circulation, emphasized a physical contradiction. The surface where that figure had just been sitting was still soaking wet. Remember that morning, the tide had been out for 3 full hours. Under the pale sunlight and North Sea wind, the surrounding rocks had been completely dry since dawn. And yet at that exact spot, sea water still remained saturated with moisture, as if a great volume of liquid had just been pressed out from some special kind of skin. It was not a splash left by waves. It was the trace of a body that had just departed. 4 days later, a second report emerged from an entirely different crew. This time there were 3 men aboard, and all 3 saw the entity at the same time before any one of them had a chance to speak. Callum Dry, an old fisherman with more than 20 years at sea, later said with a changed face that his first instinct was to save a person. But the moment the entity turned its head toward him, he knew with certainty that it was not human. Dry described a head with clearly humanoid features, but with skin so strangely dark that it seemed designed to disappear beneath deep water. By the third week, 6 different crews had reported similar encounters at that exact rock. That created a pattern so consistent. It was chilling, always a form that suggested humanity from the waist up, and always marked by a stillness that seemed deliberate. A young sailor named Ewan Tulik wrote in a private letter to his brother. It never startled. It stayed still in a strange way, like a fixed point in the middle of moving water, and it turned to look at us at the exact moment our boat changed direction. That detail alone, that it seemed to anticipate them completely, destroys the seal hypothesis. An animal reacts only when you are already too close. But the entity at Oren seemed to read the fisherman's intention the moment the bow of the boat shifted. The Orni event ended abruptly on the 28th of June, as though a curtain had fallen in the middle of the performance. Wemyss returned to that cluster of rocks one last time and found a detail that later haunted local historians. The rock nearest the waterline showed a polished pattern of wear. This was not the sharp erosion of waves, but the kind of smoothing that comes from repeated contact over decades, perhaps even centuries. Why did the authorities respond with a cold, 3-sentence letter declaring that nothing had occurred? Why did the old fisherman call that place the Resting Ledges, a name normally reserved for selkies in local legend? The answer may be that they realized this was not a stray creature. They had encountered a resident of the sea, an entity carrying heavenly genetic code erased from official history. One that had been quietly using our rocky ledges as resting points for thousands of years. From that inconvenient silence, a larger picture begins to emerge. When we connect the deliberate stillness in Scotland with the humanoid skeletal remains in Australia and England, we are forced to admit that the ocean contains more than creatures. It contains a parallel civilization. But to understand why these beings possess humanoid bodies and such sharp intelligence, we must leave behind newspaper fragments and move into the depths of the oldest ancient texts where a genetic invasion was recorded, one that permanently altered the bloodline of this planet. Many people will ask, why do they have hands, heads, and eyes so full of intelligence, just like ours? The answer is hidden in the Book of Enoch. According to those pre-flood texts, the forbidden unions between the fallen angels and the daughters of men did not only create giant Nephilim on land. They also created a kind of biological chaos that spread into every environment. The ancient text preserves a grim curse: the wives of the sinning angels shall become sirens. This is not merely a religious metaphor. It is a description of biological transformation. When the great flood came to cleanse the earth, the ocean became the perfect shelter. While the heavy giants were drowned, beings carrying heavenly genetic code and water-adapted structures found a way to survive forever. But how did this corruption rise again so powerfully after the waters receded? The answer lies in a subtle genetic bottleneck: the women aboard Noah's Ark. Researchers believe that this hybrid code did not need to manifest immediately. It could remain in recessive DNA, heavenly sequences lying dormant, silently passing through the global cleansing within the bloodlines of the survivors. Look at the line of Ham. His son Canaan received a mysterious curse from Noah the moment they had left the ark. Noah, the man described as perfect in his generations, may have recognized the reappearance of strange genetic signs in his own grandson. And it is no accident that the land of Canaan later became a hot spot for giant peoples such as the Anakim, the Rephaim, and King Og of Bashan, while the giant branch rose again on land and was destroyed in war. The underwater bloodline, the descendants carrying the siren code, continued evolving silently in the darkness of the sea. They carry the intelligence of the Watchers deep within humanoid brains, using the resting ledges of Scotland and the waters of Vigo to observe us, waiting for the day when the boundary between the two worlds cracks open again. At this point, perhaps we should pause and ask ourselves, are we really talking about strange sea monsters from legend? Personally, I believe the answer is no. What we are facing is not a mere sea monster, but a genetic legacy, a bloodline that was never truly wiped out, one that has flowed silently through thousands of years of history. Those skeletal remains washed ashore in the 21st century that you and I have just looked at are not simply dry, lifeless bones. They are torn fragments of a chapter of history that was deliberately censored and erased. They rise out of the abyss as a severe reminder that this world is larger and more mysterious than what we were taught in textbooks. The genetic code of the Watchers, those heavenly guardians, still exists. It did not disappear. It is only hiding. It is flowing silently, steadily, and with full intention beneath the deep blue waves out there. The 21st century, the unexplainable remains. Now to understand why. The skeletal remains in the 21st century are so shocking. We have to look back at newspaper reports from the early modern period. This is the point where the descriptions no longer remain at the level of myth, but begin to carry the tone of field science and the careful observation of fishing communities. The link in Spain, June of 1737. The entity with a demonic form. Let us travel back to the year 1737. To the waters near Vigo, Spain, where a shocking report was preserved in the news collections of that era. Fishermen there reported capturing a merman about 1 meter 65 centimeters tall, with an appearance that defied all imagination. Instead of the beauty of a sea god, this creature had a head exactly like that of a goat, with a long shaggy beard and mustache. Its skin was dark, covered with a thin layer of hair, and its neck was unnaturally long. The most terrifying feature was its hands. They were oversized in proportion to the body, with thin, elongated fingers ending in sharp nails, like demonic claws, along with a large fin running along the lower back. This was not the mermaid of sailors' dreams. This was a predatory being, an oceanic warrior with a body designed to tear flesh apart and survive in darkness. The silent observation at Cape Breton, Canada, August of 1886. Nearly 150 years later, on the far side of the ocean, another report in the Cape Brooklyn Eagle brought us face to face with an entirely different form. In the waters off Gabaris, a group of fishermen led by Mr. Bagnall encountered a being that rose right beside their boat. At first they thought it was a drifting corpse. But as they prepared to bring it ashore, the entity suddenly turned, sat upright on the surface of the water, and looked directly into their eyes with a cold and measured calm. The fisherman's description gives us much to consider. Its face, shoulders, and arms were astonishingly human, but its long black hair was as thick as a horse's mane. Most striking of all, its skin was no different from human skin, except for the fact that it possessed fingers of unnatural length. The being sat there, observing the men as though evaluating another species that had intruded into its territory before disappearing back into the waters of Nova Scotia. My friends, when we place these two reports side by side, what do we see? On one side, the savage and jagged form of the guardians of the waters near Vigo. On the other, the quiet, deeply humanoid observation in Canada. The common ground lies in the hands with unusually long fingers and the intelligent structure of the face. This is evidence that we are facing a race that varies according to region, water, and climate. The descendants of the Watcher's daughters. They are not merely a single species. They are a complex ecosystem existing alongside us. And if the reports from the 18th and 19th centuries were already this detailed, then what the ocean is now returning to us in the 21st century will be far more horrifying and far more real. In recent years, the ocean seems to have lost its patience. It has begun to stop hiding and to hurl back onto the shore the secrets it has wrapped in storms and strange shifts in the currents for thousands of years. I want you to focus on two specific physical links, two shocking pieces of evidence that appeared at opposite ends of the hemisphere, where skeletal remains in the form of mer beings pushed mainstream science into a corner it could not explain. The third destination takes us to the waters of Queensland in July of 2023. It was late in the day when Bobby Lee Oates was driving along a quiet beach and saw an object nearly 2 meters long lying alone on the sand like a nightmare that had just washed ashore. When she moved closer, Bobby did not find the usual decomposing whale or dolphin carcass. What she saw was a skeleton with an anatomical structure that challenged all modern biological knowledge. Its skull was an astonishingly perfect imitation of a human one, from the rounded cranial dome to the large forward-facing eye sockets to the jawbone structure carrying unmistakable primate features. And yet beneath that humanoid skull was a completely different body. The rib cage was broad and powerful, but instead of ending in a pelvis and 2 legs, it extended into a strong, bony tail. The detail that chilled Bobby the most was the presence of thick hair covering parts of the bone structure and the remaining skin. Why would an entity with a human skull possess a tail and the hair of a mammal? Experts rushed forward with the calming theory of a deformed sea lion carcass. But that argument completely collapsed when compared with the structure of the cranial dome. Sea lions do not have forward-facing sockets or such a wide cranial vault. This is physical evidence that the Watcher's daughters possess an extraordinarily complex hybrid genetic code, a race carrying warm-blooded mammalian traits, while also having a body designed to dominate deep water. Before the public had even settled down, less than 2 years later, on March 10, 2025, the ocean delivered a second message on the beach at Margate in the United Kingdom. This time, the level of horror and realism was taken even further. Paula and Dave Regan accidentally came upon a beached entity that Paula described as the most disgusting and strangest thing a human being could ever see in a lifetime. Unlike the dry skeleton in Australia, the creature at Margate seemed to have died only recently. The strangeness lay here. The head had already exposed a dry gray skeletal structure, as if it had been dead for a very long time. While the lower body, the massive fishtail, was still soft and fresh, as though it had just risen from the abyss. This mismatch in decomposition left forensic observers stunned. How could one part be reduced to bone while another still retained fresh tissue? It did not even carry the normal smell of decay or the usual slickness of a rotting carcass. The crowd that gathered that day fell into a frightening silence. They realized they were not looking at some monstrous fish, but at an intermediate being, a creature carrying half a human soul and half the instinct of a deep-sea monster, one whose cellular structure had been altered the moment it touched oxygen and surface pressure. But my friends, the appearance did not stop in Australia or Margate. To see the larger picture of a kind of reverse migration from beneath the earth back toward the surface, we cannot ignore the similar reports now appearing with unusually dense frequency along the coasts of Europe. That was in October of 2023. Right after a major storm swept across the English Channel, a strange creature washed onto the shore at Beambridge on the Isle of Wight. The first local residents to reach the scene were stunned by what they saw. This was not an ordinary globster. The most shocking detail of this being was the structure of its forelimbs. It possessed a hand with 5 long fingers, complete with flexible joints, suggesting the ability to grasp and use tools, a feature found only in higher primates. And yet, instead of joining to a pair of legs, the broad rib cage and humanoid chest ended abruptly in a large, rigid tail fin. That combination is a direct blow to mainstream evolutionary theory. Why would a creature that needs a tail fin for swimming possess the hand of a land-dominating being? Could this be the very proof of the hybrid bloodline of the Watcher's daughters' beings, carrying the intelligence of the Watchers, but cursed to bear the form of the ocean? Then, at the beginning of 2024, another physical piece of evidence appeared in the waters near Liverpool, tangled among seaweed washed ashore after the tide. It was a nearly intact skeletal structure along the spinal axis. When independent experts analyzed the images, they discovered a deeply contradictory detail. The skeleton had a narrow pelvic frame, similar to the structure that helps human beings stand upright. But instead of sockets for femurs, the spine extended and transformed into a strong, flexible tail structure, most striking of all the pelvis. The major weight-bearing structure for life on land seemed instead to function as an anchor point for tail movement in deep water. That points to a perfect biological transition, a creature designed to exist in both worlds. It was not a dolphin, and it was not some deformed sea cow. It was an entity with the skeletal frame of a human being, optimized for the high-pressure environment of the ocean floor. Why am I placing these cases side by side for you? Because they represent two states of existence within the same race. On one side, we have ancient remains that have already fossilized in Australia and Liverpool, showing that they have silently ruled the ocean trenches for thousands of years. On the other side, we have the fresher entities at Margate and Bembridge, which seem to have died only recently while attempting to approach the land. The single common feature, continuous and undeniable, is this structure a humanoid skull combined with a fishtail and 5-fingered hands. This is the exact reflection of what the Book of Enoch described when it spoke of the wives of the Watchers being transformed into sirens. These discoveries are not random. When we connect the sightings of a living entity in Israel, the hostility of the Njuzu in Zimbabwe, and these physical skeletons, we can see a clear path of revelation. The ocean is gradually giving back what it has long hidden. The cracks in reality we have spoken about for so long are no longer just theories on a computer screen. Personally, I believe we are not merely watching ordinary archaeology or biology news. We are witnessing the awakening of a bloodline erased from official history. A kingdom greater, older, and more powerful than we ever imagined, the kingdom of the Watcher's daughters. You may choose to believe the mainstream explanations about deformed dolphins in order to feel safe. Or you may choose to believe the chilling truth now standing right in front of your eyes. Leave your choice in the comments below so we can discuss it together. The Nephilim gene file from the Great Flood to the 21st century invasion. To continue from the reports of sea people in Spain and the beings observed watching fishermen in Canada, we need a deeper look at their origin. Why do they carry humanoid form? Why do they possess such intelligence and such enduring existence? The answer is not found in modern laboratories, but hidden in the oldest ancient texts, where a genetic invasion was recorded, one that permanently altered the bloodline of the earth. According to the Book of Enoch, the result of the forbidden unions between the fallen angels and the daughters of men did not stop with the giant Nephilim on land. The ancient text describes how this corruption spread into every creature, producing hybrid monstrosities between different kinds. At this point, a shocking hypothesis emerges. If the Nephilim were the rulers of the land, then another branch of that hybrid corruption found its way into the ocean. The Book of Enoch quotes the curse: "The wives of the sinning angels shall become sirens." This is not merely a spiritual metaphor. It is an actual transformation of biological form. When the flood came to cleanse the earth, the ocean became the perfect shelter. While the heavy giants were drowned, those beings carrying hybrid genetic code with body structures adapted to water found a path to survival. But how did this corruption continue after the waters receded? The answer lies in the women. They carried within themselves hybrid marks, invisible to the naked eye, fragments of heavenly DNA. Buried deep in the genome, silently passing through the bottleneck of the global cleansing. Look at the line of Ham. His son Canaan received a severe curse from Noah. And it is no accident that the land of Canaan later became the place where Israel had to confront giants such as the Anakim, the Rephaim, and King Og of Bashan, whose iron bed measured as much as 4 meters in length. This existence did not stop at the physical level. The Book of Jubilees adds another chilling detail, that the spirits of the dead Nephilim continued searching for hosts, for bloodlines already carrying genetic fragments from the original corruption, so that they could go on manifesting themselves. This explains why hybrid entities appear concentrated in certain geographic regions rather than scattered across the planet. And yet, if heavenly DNA could survive silently in the blood, then where did the physical traces of it go? The truth is that they have always remained present. But the mainstream academic system has deliberately pushed them aside. In the year 1871, in the Ohio Valley, engineers discovered 7 skeletons reaching as much as 2.4 meters in height, with abnormally large skulls and jaw structures far beyond ordinary human proportions. Even in the year 1848, President Abraham Lincoln publicly referred to giant skeletons filling the burial mounds of America in a speech at Niagara Falls. So why is it that after the Smithsonian Institution received dozens of similar reports and specimens in the late 19th century, the evidence vanished completely? The remains were reclassified, lost, or simply erased from accessible records. That concealment only highlights even more the genetic evidence that cannot be denied, especially the mystery of the elongated Paracas skulls in Peru. Unlike the ordinary custom of cranial binding, Paracas skulls possess cranial volume as much as 25% greater than that of a human skull. And they contain only 1 parietal bone instead of 2, a genetic trait that cannot be produced through physical shaping. Mitochondrial DNA analysis from these specimens pointed directly toward the Black Sea region and the Near East areas, directly connected to the migration routes after the flood. Even more striking, many of the skulls belong to women with cranial structures suggesting cognitive capacity far beyond the normal range. This is the perfect profile of the Watcher's daughter's beings, carrying heavenly intelligence in human form. From the dry skeletons of the past, we suddenly recognize a frightening parallel with what is happening in the 21st century. Jesus left one direct warning in Matthew chapter 24, verse 37. As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Most people treat this as a warning about spiritual indifference. But if we look deeper, the age of Noah was defined by biological corruption through hybridization. Today in our laboratories, we are repeating that same pattern. CRISPR-Cas9 is now cutting and splicing DNA, producing human-animal hybrid embryos under the banner of medical breakthroughs. Remember that the fallen angel Azazel did not arrive in ancient times to destroy. He came to upgrade humanity beyond its natural limits. Modern transhumanism is using the very same language of the pre-flood world, merging biology with technology in order to redesign humanity. The descendants of those entities carried rewritten genetic code in their blood, encoded it into civilizations, and passed it down through bloodlines that survived the catastrophe. Their story was once buried and censored. But my friends, what is buried always finds a way to rise again. As the modern world begins digging in the very places where those secrets have been waiting, we are no longer just seeing skeletons. We are witnessing the re-emergence of a chapter of history humanity was supposed to forget. The ocean is returning the bodies, and history is returning the truth. And when we speak of mermaid fossils in museums, we are stepping into an extraordinarily fragile boundary between speculative science installation art and deliberate attempts to conceal the truth. In reality, if you search the official catalogs of major museums such as the Smithsonian or the Natural History Museum in London, the phrase mermaid fossil is almost non-existent. And yet in the shadows of private collections and in records that were somehow forgotten, we find the following names. The mystery of the Fiji mermaid preserved in a museum. If there was ever an artifact that left the entire 19th century both horrified and mesmerized, it was the Fiji mermaid. It did not possess the radiant beauty of the mermaids in paintings, nor the softness of a mythical being emerging from the deep sea. When it appeared in exhibition halls, it caused people to freeze beneath a feeling that was difficult to name, revulsion, yet also attraction, as though they were standing before something that was never meant to exist. According to records from Barnum history, The artifact was purchased by Moses Kimball of the Boston Museum in the early 1840s, and then used in collaboration with P.T. Barnum to create a sensation in New York in the year 1842. Before that, it had been taken to London and caused a stir in the year 1822, before becoming one of Barnum's most notorious exhibits at the American Museum. What kept the Fiji mermaid alive in public memory was not only Barnum's talent for manipulation, but also its deeply unsettling form. Instead of the seductive mermaid promised in advertisements, what viewers actually faced was a dried, blackened body, twisted with the agony of a primate-like being pinned onto a fishtail. Barnum did not sell beauty. He sold a shock of feeling so strong that it overwhelmed every question about the creature's true origin. Official history regards the Fiji mermaid as a Japanese taxidermy creation assembled from cloth paper and disconnected animal parts. Modern studies of mermaid mummies in ancient Japanese temples have reinforced that conclusion. And yet, if we stop at the conclusion that it was merely a fake, we miss an important link in the way humanity deals with truths beyond its control. Why did artisans of the Edo period follow such an astonishingly consistent anatomical formula across centuries? From the small skull to the exposed, threatening teeth to the shriveled hands, every detail matches the descriptions of grotesque mer creatures found in the journals of North Sea fishermen and sailors off Spain. This is the key point. Fabrication is often used to conceal a real memory. When something too terrifying is dragged up from the water, the most effective way to strip it of its power is not to hide it, but to turn it into a strange toy. By creating thousands of stitched-together specimens with similar formed civilizations, succeeded in normalizing the abnormal. Once the public grows used to paper and fish skin mummies in museums, they will automatically treat any real creature with a similar appearance as another fake. So it becomes clear that the strategy of normalizing the abnormal did not end with the dry mummies of the Edo period. It evolved and slipped into even the most respected academic institutions of today in the form of installation art. The mystery of the Haraldskær mermaid at the National Museum of Denmark. A striking example of this is the skeleton known as the Haraldskær mermaid. In the year 2012, visitors at the National Museum of Denmark were astonished when they stood before a glass case displaying the complete skeleton of a strange being. It did not have the crude, stitched appearance of Barnum's specimen, but rather an anatomical structure so refined that it was chilling. This skeleton possessed a fully formed human skull, a rib cage with broad extended ribs, and instead of legs, a pelvic structure that connected to a long, sharp fishtail spine. Most striking of all its arms were unnaturally long, with thin fingers like dead branches. Its presence in a national museum created a wave of extreme curiosity, forcing the authorities to offer an explanation immediately. The museum declared that it was only an artwork by the artist Mila Hyde, installed to educate the public about the fragility of belief and the illusory nature of myths. According to them, the skeleton was a clever combination of human bones and the bones of a small swordfish. And yet, my friends, that very confession opens an even deeper black hole of suspicion. Why would a modern artist, given full creative freedom, always choose an anatomical structure that matches so astonishingly well with reports from the 18th and 19th centuries? Why is it still the same oversized skull, the same long-fingered hands, the same gloomy observant present? The museum argues that the piece uses art to mock mythology. But there is one truth academia always avoids: art is often the strongest way. Inherited memory rises back to the surface. When an artist recreates that form with such anatomical precision, matching reports from the North Sea or the Aran Islands, they may be unintentionally sketching a real prototype that has remained submerged deep within humanity's genetic memory. Ask yourself this: if one day you came across a living entity washed ashore with the exact same shape as the Haraldskær skeleton, what would your first reaction be? You would not call the police or alert the scientific community. You would shrug and say, "Oh, it's just another installation piece." That is the highest form of censorship. By turning these hybrid beings into installation art or fictional works, institutions have created a perfect shield. They do not need to burn the skeletons or hide them away. They only need to attach an artist's name and an educational purpose to them. Once truth is displayed as a refined joke, it is forever stripped of the power to be recognized as an existing race. And when we see through the veil created by both Barnum and the National Museum of Denmark, a clear path begins to emerge. From stitched mummies made to shock to artistic skeletons, made to mock all of it, points toward one single goal: to keep humanity in a constant state of skepticism, so that when the Watcher's daughters truly reveal themselves, we will greet them with a laugh instead of survival instinct. However, the truth is, my friends, not everything in museums is installation art or a cheap hoax. There are specimens that make even the sharpest minds at the most prestigious universities shudder when they come near them. If the Harold's Care mermaid can be softened beneath the label of art, then what happened at Buxton became a genuine nightmare for mainstream science. The mystery of the 300-year-old mummy at ASAKUCHI Temple when immortality was placed under a CT scanner. If Barnum's Fiji mermaid was treated as a cheap hoax, then the 12-inch mummy, about 30 centimeters long, at a temple in the city of Asakuchi, Japan, carries a completely different weight, the weight of faith. Said to have been caught in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Shikoku Island, sometime between the years 1736 and 1741. This creature bears a deeply haunting face, sharp teeth, claw-like hands drawn inward, and hair growing from its head, a strange humanoid form joined to the tail of a fish. But the most terrifying part does not lie in its appearance. It lies in the curse attached to it. Whoever eats the flesh of this creature will attain immortality. The legend of Yaobikuni, the woman who accidentally ate mermaid flesh and lived to be 800 years old, still echoes around the temple where this mummy is kept. People even believe that in the past, some deliberately scraped scales from the mummy and consumed them in the hope of finding eternal life. In the year 2022, scientists from Kurashiki University of Science and the Arts subjected this entity to CT scanning. The published results later concluded that it was a complex artificial construction made from paper cloth and animal parts. And yet, this file does not close so simply. Look deeper at the real question. Why would a fake entity be able to sustain such powerful spiritual force for 300 years? Why would an entire community revere and believe in immortality through something stitched together by human hands? Our answer does not lie in the papier-mâché or the fish skin on the surface. It lies here. Why does this pattern exist at all? Why is the legend of eating mermaid flesh to gain immortality so widespread across Japan? If human beings had never once come into contact with a being carrying a form of genetic power so exceptional that it seemed capable of extending life itself, the act of CT scanning by modern scientists was in truth an attempt to strip the fear of its sacred power. The moment they declared it a fabrication, they also erased belief in the possibility of a real race standing behind the legend. But for the people who lived with the memory of Yaobikuni, this mummy was never merely a handmade object. It was a vessel of memory. The memory of a race believed to possess the power to alter the laws of life and death, descendants carrying heavenly genetic code. What we would call the underwater Nephilim. Science may be able to scan through layers of paper and skin, but it cannot scan through the dread that has been pressed into the blood of the fishermen of Shikoku for the last 3 centuries. The difference between a handcrafted object made to deceive and a true biological entity lies at the boundary of the seams. While the scientists at Asakuchi Temple could easily use scanners to peel back each layer of papier-mâché and identify it as a spiritual artifact, the world still holds its breath before those files in which even the most advanced modern technology has reached its limit. There are specimens that the deeper they are analyzed, the greater the fear becomes, because they reveal no trace at all of the human hand. That is the moment when we must confront one of the most staggering case files in the history of observation. The Buxton File, when science fell silent before the existence of mermaids. At the Buxton Museum in England, there is a mermaid specimen that lay quietly inside a glass case for decades, long enough for most visitors to see it as nothing more than a strange Victorian curiosity. And yet it is precisely that long silence that makes this file so remarkable. Because when an object survives too long in the space between exhibition culture, collecting history, and the public imagination, it begins to gather a very unusual kind of power. It no longer remains just an artifact. It becomes a test of how human beings respond when they stand before something that bears the shape of life, yet falls outside every familiar pattern. From late in the year 2010 through the spring of the year 2012, the Buxton specimen became the subject of a research and conservation project carried out through the University of Lincoln in collaboration with experts connected to the Horniman Museum. The research team used X-ray imaging, CT scanning, surface material analysis, and attempts to extract DNA from parts of the specimen. The results published in the Mermaid's Uncovered study showed that this was not a single natural body, but a structure built with extraordinarily high skill. Forensic anthropologist Gillian Fowler confirmed that there was no human skeletal material in the Buxton specimen. The inner and outer layers showed the presence of papier-mâché wood clay, cloth metal wire, along with a real fishtail, most likely from a carp species. The DNA taken from the teeth and tail had degraded so far that it could no longer produce a useful identification result. And this is exactly where the Buxton file becomes frightening in a different way. Because when science opened it up, they did not find a real mermaid in the simple biological sense. They found something even more troubling. A fabricated object constructed with such anatomical intelligence, material precision, and visual effect that it had deceived the intuition of generations. The false framework was made in such a way that the human eye automatically reads it as one unified body. The papier-mâché and clay were shaped to suggest bone, sinew, rib cage, eye sockets, and hand joints. The real fishtail anchored everything else into an intensely organic feeling. In other words, what makes the viewer shudder is not the fact that it is a real creature, but the fact that whoever created it understood with extraordinary clarity how to assemble it so that the human brain would experience it as real. That is the point most modern viewers tend to overlook. They hear the words artifact or fabrication and assume the mystery is over. But what created an entire tradition of objects like this, repeated and refined so persistently? Research into the mermaid specimens at Horniman and Buxton shows that they belong to a wider tradition of strange objects, often described as Japanese monkeyfish or various mermaid specimens circulating through networks of collection, exhibition, and the trade in curiosities. And whenever one bodily pattern repeats itself across many places and many decades, it always raises two possibilities, side by side. Either this was a market formula so successful that it was copied again and again, or there was some visual prototype powerful enough to imprint itself deeply into collective memory, causing people to return to the same form every time they tried to recreate a mermaid. That is the crack in the protective wall of official history. It shows that the story of mermaids in museums does not move along a clean, straight line between real and fake, but lives in a gray zone, a blurred region where art, anatomy, and exhibition craft blend together in order to dissolve our fear. Look at the way we treat abnormality. The more terrifying an entity is, the more strongly human beings want to lock it behind glass. The more a form exceeds our understanding, the more quickly society rushes to frame it with safe labels like curiosity, folk object, or installation art. Once something has been labeled for long enough, we automatically relax our guard. It is an extremely effective psychological mechanism. It does not erase the object from the world. It simply strips that object of its power in the imagination of the majority. Once you believe it is art, you stop asking questions about its biological origin. That is why Buxton is such an expensive lesson in the way modern knowledge domesticates forms that exceed the standard. Science can enter the room and explain in exact detail the outer shell made from primate-like bone structures. Why do mermaids and giants no longer exist in our world today? Have you ever wondered why mermaids and giants seem entirely absent from our reality today? Did they truly vanish into nothingness? Or are we simply living in an age in which their presence has been pushed to the outer edge of human awareness? The most realistic hypothesis takes us back to the Great Flood, a turning point that Lobsang Rampa, along with many ancient civilizations, described as a planetary reset. When the Earth's axis shifted and the waters rose, suddenly, giant creatures were the first to be removed by natural selection. In biology, the larger the body, the greater the cost in resources. When the environment collapsed, the giant races weakened and gave way to smaller, more adaptable beings, human beings like us. But for the mere people, the catastrophe opened a different door. When ocean currents were completely overturned after meteor impacts, they did not perish. They simply withdrew. My friends, the ocean covers as much as 70% of the Earth, and we have explored less than 5% of it. Abysses like the Mariana Trench are not merely places of pressure and darkness. They are the perfect refuge for a civilization carrying the intelligence of the Watchers. They still exist in layers of depth that modern radar and satellites have never been able to scan, beyond the reach of a humanity that has grown used to living only in the artificial light of cities. There is also a higher argument, one rooted in quantum physics and spirituality. This disappearance may actually have been a kind of dimensional descent. In the Golden Age, when human beings could still use the third eye, our reality was far more radiant and multidimensional. At that time, mere people existed at a vibrational frequency we could see and interact with easily. But when humanity entered the age of decline, the age of material heaviness and spiritual dullness, our own frequency was dragged downward. And what was the result? We lost the ability to perceive beings that exist on higher levels. They are still there right beside us, but like a radio station on a different frequency, our ordinary eyes cannot receive their signal. Ancient maps and the testimonies of prophets whose third eye had been opened are the surviving fragments of a time when the boundary between the two worlds still overlapped. And yet, my friends, if this shift in frequency pushed them out of our sight, then paper records written in black ink are still quietly confirming their existence in some of the most tightly sealed archives on Earth. To understand why these entities carrying heavenly genetic code chose the path of concealment, we are forced to open a file that authorities have always wanted to keep closed. Let us look at the Codex Vaticanus of the Aztecs, a treasure currently sealed inside the secret libraries of the Vatican. This is not merely a religious document. It is a record of a harsh truth. Official history has chosen to forget. Our Earth was once home to 4 generations of giants. Each of those generations passed through a brutal purification. And the 4th generation, the one that lived in the age of the Son of Water, was completely submerged in a global great flood. And yet the German scholar Alexander von Humboldt, when studying these ancient manuscripts in depth, found one detail full of significance. Not all of them were destroyed. 7 giants survived by taking refuge in the deepest caves, places beyond the reach of the rising sea. One of them, Zelhua, later built the Great Pyramids at Chololan in memory of the mountain that had saved his life. That detail gives us a clear picture giants and merpeople did not vanish completely after the catastrophe. They became a handful of survivors, isolated and solitary, and began to learn how to avoid our world in order to preserve their lives. Why can modern humanity not live alongside them? The answer may lie in the enormous difference in both physical power and temperament that we have already examined. When a being can stop the course of a river or carry an elephant as easily as someone carries a market basket, that being becomes a terror by nature. The journals of the diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan and the records associated with Magellan do not describe size alone. They describe a kind of defensive ferocity. They withdrew into the steep mountains of Venezuela, the deep forests of the Amazon, and the unexplored abysses of the oceans, not to prepare for an attack, but to carry out one final survival instinct. They chose solitude in order to keep humanity's curiosity away, a species that has always brought destruction whenever it stepped into the lands of the old gods. And that very isolation became the final shield protecting them from a world that no longer leaves room for the magnificent. But my friends, this retreat cannot last forever. What we are witnessing today, from remains washing ashore to figures appearing on rocky ledges, is not coincidence. It is a sign that the veil is beginning to tear, and that is when we must face a hard reality: the return of the Watcher's daughter. The silence of the scientific world before the Buxton specimen or the missing files at the Smithsonian is not an accident. It is a defensive reflex before a truth powerful enough to collapse the entire human family tree. Because if we admit that these hybrid entities exist, then we are forced to admit the darkest chapter of pre-flood history, the rise of the Watcher's daughters. According to the Book of Enoch, when the fallen angels, the Watchers, descended to earth, their goal was not only to create giant Nephilim to dominate the land. They unleashed a widespread genetic invasion, altering the structure of living creatures in order to produce monstrosities carrying heavenly intelligence. While the giant Nephilim were swept away by the burden of their own size and the purges that followed the daughters born of that hybridization received a different fate. They possessed perfect humanoid form, yet within them was a genome restructured to survive in places human beings could never reach: the deep ocean. These are not the beautiful mermaids of fairy tales, but entities carrying the DNA of the Watcher's guardians of ancient knowledge, silently surviving under the crushing pressure of the sea floor for thousands of years. Why are they returning now? The answer lies in the warning of Jesus. As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. The days of Noah were marked not only by sin, but by genetic corruption. Today, as humanity begins to touch technologies such as CRISPR and hybrid chimera embryos, we are unintentionally creating a biological frequency that resembles the pre-flood world. The ocean is beginning to cast ashore remains in Australia, England, and Scotland. Not by accident, but because the genetic code of the Watchers is being activated again. The skeletons with human skulls and fishtails in museums, the deliberately motionless entities perched on North Sea rocks, are messages sent from the past. We are not seeing new species. We are seeing the genetic fragments of a race that was never truly gone. But my friends, if we look at them only through the lens of biology or hybrid genetic codes, we will miss the very core of what gives this race its power and its endurance. Because just like human beings, the merfolk do not survive by instinct alone. They live and breathe within a world of faith and divine guidance. The mystery of the merfolk kingdom. In the memory of humankind, we have Poseidon as the god who rules the ocean. But to the merfolk, that is not mythology. In the deep regions of the sea where sunlight cannot reach, they are still worshiping a statue of the sea god inside ancient temples. It is the image of a majestic and masculine merman deity, solemn and powerful, holding a trident to command the raging waves. Their ritual offerings are so pure, they seem almost otherworldly. What they present is not flesh and blood, but tens of thousands of large white flawless pearls, each one placed reverently inside a clamshell, as though it were a crystallization of the spiritual essence of the sea. They do not merely survive, they worship. Their dwelling places are the grand palaces of prehistoric civilizations that sank to the ocean floor millions of years ago. There they transformed the ancient ruins into sacred divine halls, Inside those shrines, the stone walls still preserve incantations in hieroglyphic script and ancestral tablets of adepts who once practiced esoteric cultivation. This is an absolute forbidden zone, a place where only the king, the queen, and merfolk who have reached a very high level of spiritual cultivation are permitted to enter. The most mysterious feature is their system of illumination. They do not use electricity or ordinary fire, but a special mineral stone containing magnesium. When activated through spiritual arts, this stone emits a brilliant blue-white light, burning steadily for centuries beneath enormous water pressure, without ever going out. The merfolk believe that life is a journey of cultivation toward union between heaven, sea, and man. And yet, because their bodily structure lacks the same kind of Dantean system found in human beings, their path toward transcendence is far more difficult. An ordinary mer-being must pass through at least 7 reincarnated lives before reaching attainment. Their king is not merely an administrative ruler, but must be a spiritual master who has reached the level of a bodhisattva or higher. Meanwhile, the mer queen possesses powers that leave us astonished. She can summon the wandering souls of sea creatures to aid in battle or manipulate water pressure to create devastating tidal waves in defense of the kingdom. The history of the merfolk kingdom records a shocking event in the 180th year, under the reign of their ruling king. At that time, a cruel sea monster appeared, spreading terror and devouring countless members of the tribe. Through meditation, the Mer King perceived its true nature. It was a demonic sea serpent that had cultivated itself for 788 years beneath the Arctic Ocean. It measured 8 meters in length, its body jet black with blood-red eyes, radiating a poisonous, murderous force so deadly that no living thing could survive within several kilometers of it. A plan to destroy the demon was laid out. The queen, holding a white crystal staff, led 180 elite warriors into ambush around the monster's cave. They used a young mer being as bait after sprinkling a deadly poison into the food, a toxin prepared by the queen herself. When the serpent took the bait and its nervous system was paralyzed, the queen used a stream of sapphire blue energy from her staff to lock down its magic, allowing the warriors to launch hundreds of poisonous spiked shields and finish the monster. In the end, the serpent's soul was sealed forever by the Mer King within its own remains at the deepest floor of the Arctic Ocean. That Mer King, after nearly 7,000 years of cultivation beneath the sea, was finally summoned by the divine. He was shown that his mission was not yet complete and that he had to be reborn into the human world to begin a new stage of existence, perhaps to help humanity reconnect with the spiritual values it has lost. Today, according to what the third eye has seen, there are still more than 8,000 merfolk living quietly in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean and the waters near Australia. They are a remarkable population of beings who have passed through hundreds of millions of years of rise and decline under divine guidance. They are not mythology. They are a race existing alongside us, preserving the balance of the ocean and waiting for the moment when humanity becomes spiritually awake enough to recognize their presence. This story reminds us of one thing: the ocean does not contain only water and fish. It contains an entire sacred history that our mortal eyes often overlook. The existence of merfolk is proof that life always seeks a path toward transcendence, whether on the summit of the highest mountain or in the darkest abyss of this planet. But everyone, if the grand palaces and spiritual kings beneath the ocean floor still remain mysteries beyond the reach of mortal eyes, then even here in the surface world, there is still one living link. It is a vivid living proof that human beings and the ocean can blend together so deeply that the biological boundary itself begins to disappear. To understand this astonishing adaptation, we have to turn to a tribe often regarded as flesh and blood merfolk living among us in the real world. The mystery of the real-life merfolk tribe, the legend of the BAJAU LAUT. Astonishingly, on the island of Borneo, in the state of Sabah, Malaysia, there is a tribe that has preserved such a strange way of life that nowhere else in the world can truly be compared to it. They are the BAJAU LAUT, the sea nomads of the Sulawesi waters. For centuries, they have lived on the sea, been born on the sea, and even died on the sea. From the long, narrow lepa-lepa boats to the simple stilt houses swaying above coral reefs, their lives form an endless love song with the ocean. The BAJAU are known around the world as true merfolk. Without oxygen tanks, without modern diving suits, they use only homemade wooden diving goggles and crude spears to hunt their prey on the ocean floor. BAJAU divers can descend to depths of 20 meters to 60 meters and hold their breath for 5 to 13 minutes. An achievement so extraordinary that even the finest free-diving athletes in the world are left in awe. But the miracle does not stop at skill. It is written into their genetic code. Genetic researchers from the University of Copenhagen discovered that after thousands of years of adaptation, BAJAU bodies have changed. Their spleens are 50% larger than those of ordinary land-dwelling people. When they dive, the spleen contracts and releases additional oxygen-rich red blood cells into the bloodstream, allowing them to remain underwater longer. This is clear evidence of an evolution back toward the sea. A genetic mark that seems to echo the ancient origins of the people of the waters. To reach this merfolk state, BAJAU children undergo a painful ritual from the moment they are very young, so that their ears will not burst. Under the massive pressure of the water, they deliberately puncture their own eardrums. They then have to lie still for a week while the wound heals, and after that, water pressure no longer stands as the same barrier. A BAJAU sailor named Sulbin once said, "Your ears will bleed, you will suffer, and you will have to lie still in darkness for a week. But after that, the sea will no longer hurt." The price of profound deafness is a new kind of power. Their eyes transform so they can see clearly underwater, like fish with highly flexible pupils that allow them to gather light in the deepest darkness. And yet the life of the BAJAU is not only a story of biology. They believe they are the descendants of a lost kingdom of the sea. Most BAJAU are Sunni Muslims, but their faith is woven closely together with a marine form of animism. They believe in sea spirits known as Ombo de Laut. Whenever a child is born, the placenta is placed inside a coconut shell and set adrift upon the sea. They believe that child has a twin sibling beneath the water and that the sea will protect that sibling throughout life. Strangely enough, BAJAU divers often speak of seeing human-shaped shadows appearing and disappearing among distant coral reefs entities that do not belong to their tribe, yet carry an oddly humanoid form. Could it be that the BAJAU are the chosen people meant to guard the boundary between two worlds? Today, this nomadic way of life is slowly coming to a close under the pressure of modern society. The Malaysian government and conservation organizations are bringing them onto land, forcing them to adapt to life on shore. But there is an ironic truth in all of this. When the BAJAU come ashore, they often suffer from what is called land sickness. Their bodies have grown so accustomed to the rhythm of waves and the pressure of water that dry land feels foreign, barren, and wrong. The gradual disappearance of the BAJAU may be the final chapter of an age when human beings and merfolk could still reach out and touch one another. But at the same time, it may also be a warning. As the last merfolk on land are being pushed onto the shore, the true Watcher's daughters from the deepest abyss are beginning their return. Could it be that the presence of the BAJAU is a reminder that deep within each of us, there is still a sleeping part of the merfolk waiting for the day it may return to the embrace of the Mother Sea? But the story of the BAJAU is not merely an isolated case in Southeast Asia. If we widen our view to the global level, an even more astonishing picture begins to emerge. From the coastal people of Iceland, with their legends of seal-skinned beings who can shed their outer covering and walk onto land, to the Dogon tribe of Mali in West Africa, a people living thousands of miles from the ocean, yet possessing astonishingly precise astronomical knowledge about Sirius, said to have been taught to them by the Namo, amphibious, godlike beings with the form of merfolk. What is really happening here? When we connect the genetic spleen adaptation of the BAJAU with the mermaid remains of perfect anatomical structure at Buxton and in Denmark, a startling hypothesis appears: humanity never truly left the ocean. Image a worldwide map highlighting locations of mermaid sightings and aquatic tribes. The ocean is not merely a storehouse of water. It is a vast genetic bank. Perhaps for millions of years, while the land endured one brutal cleansing after another, one branch of humanity chose to dive deep and became the very Watcher's daughters we have been searching for. Meanwhile, another branch remained on land, yet still carried within it the dormant codes of the sea. The BAJAU are simply the people who accidentally reactivated those codes. The rise of remains washing ashore and the increasing number of unidentified submerged objects in the depths during the 21st century may be the sign of a genetic reunion. As the boundary between land and sea is gradually erased by climate change and the collapse of ecosystems, the dwellers of the deep are beginning to rise and re-examine their brothers and sisters on land. My friends, we are standing at the threshold of a great awakening. The skeletons in museums and the divers with giant spleens are all speaking the same language. We are not alone on this planet. The ocean is preparing to reveal its final secrets. And when the call from the abyss finally sounds, when the daughters of the Watchers truly appear before all humanity, will we receive them as monsters from legend? Or will we recognize them as a lost part of our own form, separated from us millions of years ago? The answer may already be in the blood flowing through your veins. Blood as salty as seawater, still moving quietly, still waiting for the day it can beat again in rhythm with the vast heart of the ocean. We have traveled a long road from the lonely rock ledges of the North Sea, through the secret archival corridors of the Smithsonian, all the way down to temples flooded with mineral light beneath the vast floor of the ocean. And when we weave all of these scattered fragments together, from the extraordinary spleen adaptation of the BAJAU, to the seamless anatomical structure at Buxton, to the curse of immortality at ASAKUCHI Temple, a terrifying larger picture begins to come into focus. None of that evidence is the random coincidence of nature. We are not merely seeing strange creatures. We are witnessing the rise of a chapter of history that was erased, the return of the Watcher's daughters. Those beings bearing perfect humanoid form, yet carrying the genetic code of the ocean, are the living remnants of a pre-flood genetic invasion. They are the result of a sophisticated contingency plan, a bloodline carrying heavenly DNA that chose to dive deep into the sea in order to escape the cleansing judgment of God. For thousands of years, they hid themselves within the palaces of drowned civilizations, cultivating their power and watching the surface world through the veil of the deep. But now, as humanity grows proud in its technology and practicality, that veil is beginning to tear. And yet, we need the clarity to see an even darker truth behind those seductive forms and supernatural powers. Because in the end, behind the fallen angels, the ones who sowed this altered genetic code into our planet, stands Satan himself, the most dangerous devil of all. The one who betrayed God and was cast out of heaven has never once laid down his rage. He does not merely seek to destroy the earth. He seeks to defile every part of God's creation. Those daughters of the Watchers beneath the sea, however sacred or powerful they may appear, may in truth be pieces on a board in a long design. Satan has been preparing in silence for thousands of years. He created hybrid races, beings with enchanting beauty, yet minds bent by rebellion for one ultimate purpose: to harm the children of God and to distort the path of human development. The repeated washing ashore of mer-creature remains in recent years, and the growing number of unidentified submerged objects may be the final sign that Satan is activating his hidden armies. He waits until humanity loses faith in the divine. He waits until we trust only what machines can see. And then he releases the old gods from the depths of the earth and sea beings who will come in the name of salvation, but whose true purpose is to bind our souls into a new dark order. The ocean does not contain only water and fish. It holds the breath of hatred from those who were rejected by heaven. The existence of merfolk of giants, or of any hybrid race, is a reminder that the war between light and darkness never ended. It has only shifted its battleground from the land into the abysses we still cannot reach. The next time you stand before the vast sea and feel a cold wind move through you, understand this: it is not only wind. It is the whisper of a past demanding its future back. Will you choose to keep sleeping beneath the safe labels of museums? Or will you open the third eye and recognize the subtle traps being laid beneath those deep blue waves? The truth is rising, and it is nothing like the softness of waves against the shore. It carries the breath of fallen angels and the will of the greatest rebel in history. Stay awake, because the ocean has begun to speak. And in the end, the most important truth we must carve into our hearts after closing this file is absolute vigilance against Satan and his allies. Remember this? Well, Satan never appears at first in the form of a terrifying monster. He is a master of counterfeit, one who can turn the most grotesque things into seductive wonders and transform lies into scientific truths. The daughters of the Watchers, however ethereal their beauty, or however extraordinary their spiritual power, may in truth be pieces in a strategy Satan has long prepared. He uses our curiosity. He uses the cracks in humanity's faith to bring these hybrid entities back into the surface world. His purpose is nothing less than to blur the image of God and replace it with false gods rising from the floor of the sea and the depths of the earth. Look closely at the way he operates. He allows us to find stitched bones so that we grow casual and careless. He allows us to marvel at the extraordinary diving abilities of tribes so that we forget the dark spiritual source behind them. And then when the veil between the two worlds finally collapses, Satan will strike with his final blow, turning these beings into guides and leaders, causing humanity to kneel before what was born from genetic rebellion. Do not be deceived by appearances. The allies of Satan are not only beings beneath the water. They are also those who quietly manipulate information, those who deliberately place labels like art or science over terrifying spiritual truths. They want you to believe that this world is only material, or worse, to place your hope in a false salvation offered by those who carry the genetic code of the Watchers. Your wakefulness is the only barrier left. Stay alert to every sign. Be wary of anything that appears too magnificent, yet lacks the light of true compassion. Satan harms the children of God by cutting them off from their source and leading them into mazes of false power. The mer beings who are returning are not here to grant immortality. Perhaps they have come to test whether humanity still has enough discernment left to recognize what belongs to his creation and what is the stain of the enemy of God. As you stand before the vast sea, keep your mind still like the water, yet sharp like a sacred sword. Because in this war, the one who loses is not the one who lacks knowledge, but the one whose heart is seduced by the phantoms of the abyss. I am Sleep Codex. Thank you for walking with me through this deeply unsettling file. Do not forget to leave your thoughts below, because in this war of information, the wakefulness of each person is the strongest weapon of all. I will see you again in the next dark region of truth. May your sleep be restless.